Welcome 1, 2, and 3 to the Big Boys Table, episode 65, Player versus Player. That's the title of this one, and of course joining me is IskatuMesk, who you may have heard on a recent Cosmonarchy Brood War castover. How are you, dude?
Today is not a good day. January in general has been a shit show.
And it has to close out the way that it started, I suppose, with one last day of dumb.
Yeah, it's, I woke up, let's see, around 11, and it's 8 a.m. right now, and I could feel in my throat, it feels like acid reflux, which I have had in the past, but it's not acid reflux. It just feels like it. And that's actually from back pain, and I've been getting that on and off from the chair. I've never had it when laying down, and then that just kicked off a whole day of insanity. I must have slept in some weird position, and it like fucked up the left side of my collarbone, the left side of my neck, the left side of my face. I got pain going up and down my arm. I was really dizzy. It was probably the worst I'd felt since last January when I had that episode with the blood pressure or whatever the fuck it was. And then, of course, is like after I'm like trying to make food or whatever, I can hear my grandmother just talking to herself in her sleep again, so... Yeah, it's been because she has like just episodes where she sees things or talks to things in the middle of the night. So it's her sleep is also terrible, and she doesn't take it nearly as well. So yeah, it's been a day already.
It's been a day already.
Not good.
Well, your sleep schedule is also like you're going to bed at like the mid-afternoon or something? Or
it cycles every like week or two. It just keeps going back and forth because I really don't get any sleep. I wake up like every like 5 to 10 minutes. So it's quite rare for me to actually get deep sleep, so I'm never really fully rested. So I can be laying in bed for like 12 hours, and I might get like 2 hours of sleep. Now I hear the phone ringing, which is undoubtedly going to be, "This is Amazon. A charge has been placed onto your account. Go to our website to resolve it." No one phones that, ain't.
Yeah, why would they phone so early if not to...
Because all the scammers are from Ontario, and they're like an hour or two ahead.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, there's a lot of them that spam.
Well, listen, scammers, spammers. I mean, it sounds like you're talking about people doing Wraith Rush strategies in CMBW to me. That's,
No, that's legitimate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's legitimate. When you
true.
go to the effort of sticking your fucking star pad over in this corner somewhere, and you see their worker, and you drop down a barracks just to make them think that you're actually doing something.
Yeah,
maybe not as good as the lattice switch.
Right. No, that one was pretty good.
But it still got him, though. Still got him. Both of them got him.
Yeah, I think what people are, like, they need to do better, right? So, like, first of all, for context, we are talking about Cosmonarchy Brood War, the total conversion, probably, I would say, pretty safely at this point, the most ambitious conversion that's ever been made to this level of, like, at least been finished. I'm sure there's been more ambitious projects that never got off the ground, but getting for most ambitious,
there is no one who's done really low level stuff before. So.
Right. So in that case, I get to proudly display that moniker at least. But the main thing that I get to say about it is lately we've been obviously seeing a lot of PvP games, a lot of castovers. You obviously did a guest one very recently, and one of the things that I have been noticing is like the way that it has affected the balancing of the game to, we've made a ton of changes since the very first castover came out. And one of the things that I would really like to avoid doing in general as a designer is I don't want to like only take somebody's word for a balance problem, which, sounds like, especially if you're dealing with a big team, like, well, how could you possibly not do that at some level? You almost need like what we've seen recently in StarCraft 2. I don't know if you've been following it, is to my knowledge, there's like a council of players who are just saying, yeah, these would be the changes that would make the game better. And the players don't know, like the players, I'll say specifically, we've received some suggestions from players in the past, even for CMBW at a small scale with this tight-knit community, that like basically just make gimmicks out of units or whatever, or like say, well, this interaction is really powerful, so just make it so that it's prohibited in this one case or whatever. And like that's like the designing backwards, working backwards towards a goal without really making or not arriving there naturally, right? If there's a problem, then you want to like solve it as naturally as possible, because otherwise you basically instantiate this design philosophy, this ethic, this ethos that results in you just not ever like having all these special rules, right? And so, for example, Kian actually recently pointed out that he actually liked the Apostles better when they only affected biological units. And I'm not saying this to call him out specifically, but it's like one of the most recent examples of somebody like referencing this. He did also say that he's pretty sure it's never going to change, so he's not really making it as a suggestion. But the reason why we decided to issue those labels is because they basically are this sort of hard counter mentality where, oh, like if you have this flag, which, in some cases is arbitrary, in some cases maybe makes sense, like biological versus mechanical, I guess is a fine sort of line to draw in some respects. But, it feels kind of arbitrary because, like, in the case of CMBW, the shaman comes out of the barracks, but it would obviously be mechanical if you look at it. And then as a result, maybe it wouldn't be repairable by things that are only repair biological units or whatever. So you could already start to see this weird interaction happening where like units that come out of a structure that are shared with one flag, like this other flag makes this other unit really weird. So anyway, the StarCraft 2 solution of just having players design stuff is not guaranteed to find any success. And the game is already, I think, too far from saving in that respect anyway. But like there's a reason why they have slow fields in the middle of all their maps, and every map has to have a Reaper spot so that you can put Reapers up the cliff and scout in the main, because otherwise the game falls apart, and they're just not interested in designing a game that doesn't fall apart without those handholds. So like in many ways, it's the same thing as like in the default Brood War maps. Make sure that in every island you place a mineral field that has 0 minerals on it, but just blocks command centers from landing there, because otherwise Terran OP. It's like, well, what if we designed the game so that wasn't a problem? And so obviously Brood War is a different beast because they're never going to go and balance that, and that's fine. Like better, as we see with StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3, it's better to not balance the game from the developer side because they are incompetent, and it's also better if the players also don't do it. Although I think the narrative will never focus against the players because the players are like community figures, and a lot of people really like players, which is very different than developers. Developers will get flack endlessly, usually. From like the hardcore esports.
Well, that's one of the reasons why that is because developers have a well-earned reputation of not actually playing the game. If developers actually played the game, then none of that would exist.
Exactly, yeah.
Instead, they end up getting mascots like David Kim, who played a game like once a long time ago, and then the developers prop them up on a pedestal.
Well, if they can just point to somebody who has experience playing these kinds of games or has played this game that they're actually working on to somewhat of a high level, like higher than most average plebs, then at the very least they can sort of hide behind it, even if their decision making is bad. But like as we just pointed out, just playing the game isn't actually enough to know that you can be equipped to make good decisions about changing the game. And that's probably the main thing is like, I'm certainly open to the idea that there's an error report or a bug report or a balance issue, and that is reported to me. And then like, based on how seriously I take the issue, I try to reproduce it myself. I try to, at the very least, like run through it hypothetically or like see a case where it happens in a replay. And certainly, with anything that would be more massive, anything that would be more significant, I would 100% want to like sit on it, potential changes to it for a while. Like that's why we have the pre-release branch as I test a bunch of shit out. Lately, it looks like most of the tests have been successful, which is, it speaks to something that like, okay, maybe I'm like making right choices in that respect where we are getting closer to the intention and we're getting closer to a better state where now it isn't just, oh, let me rush Naths every game or whatever. So yeah, like I think we are getting to a point where, it's hard for me to tell if things are problematic because players are bad or if things are problematic because things are OP or busted. You know what I mean? So that's the main reason why I want to avoid making crazy slapstick changes every single patch, even though I guess on a balancing level, like we are changing costs of things a lot. We're changing a lot of other things, like timings are going to be affected. On this granular level, things are changing every patch. But on a level of like the entire game changing in terms of how you approach it, that ship has sailed now. Like you specifically, Mesk, you're not having to relearn how resources work every patch now, every time you play. Yeah. Like that stuff is all taken care of. Like we've settled on a solution and now we're just trying to refine it. So do you have many impressions from like the way that things have been evolving? I know you've got your own stuff and you've been busy, and also your life is insane. So I don't suspect that you've managed to really like pour over the patch notes and change everything, or like really even figure out what all of these mean or what the state of everything is. But based on what you have seen, the games that you or the single game that you casted over, games you've been participating in, and just generally following the development of the project, how has it been since we started these castovers in general? How has the player versus player stuff treated you in your opinion?
I will be honest that when I initially I wasn't really watching videos that much or even really at all. I hardly even followed any updates or anything like that in general because when they first started, I didn't have time. And two, I didn't know really how much time I was going to be investing into this.
Right.
But especially in the month of January, I kind of wanted to push attention away from Apex X and give myself a chance to recharge because I was starting to feel burnout, and I really didn't want to get too deep into that. It was getting hard for me because I knew like a lot of new stuff needs to be done, and
Right.
there's actually a very major video I'm working on right now that actually goes over these exact subjects you're talking about, just a different context, which is trying to analyze feedback within different lenses and my intentions versus what I have versus what people see versus their experiences and so on. And but as I got more into it, it was like, okay, I'll try to play this more regularly and get into it and see. Honestly, to me, it hasn't really changed that much since I started playing because it was already so volatile and so alien to me.
Mm-hmm.
And by started playing, I mean more or less in recent times. It's obviously changed tremendously since I first started messing around with the project some months ago. The tech and resources and everything all dramatically changed basically every single time I sat down with it. But it's I think what changed more to me rather than the actual project in itself was more about how people were playing it. Because I think before I started playing it, a lot of you guys apparently had never really had somebody who was dedicated to cheesing the fuck out of people and proxying them and otherwise being a complete cunt. And
Sure.
I managed to score just a lot with that over and over and over again. And it was really obvious that people started picking up from that. So I noticed that Kian started trying to pick up things with that. And you to an extent as well, although maybe it was just the play style that you acquired by dealing with the barracks or whatever. But you would see some evolution of that, and then people, of course, became more consciously aware that these things can happen as well. And then the other evolution I saw, of course, is when you see all the Nath rushes and stuff like that, people have started to become much more conscious of that, and you start trying to see people try to evolve around that. To me, CMBW is kind of in this sort of the same position that we are with the TGS Warcraft 3 map that we have been not very focused, but just like absently updating every couple, because we only play like one game of that every like 2 weeks.
Okay.
And but HKS was trying to update it and polish it up and make it a little bit more balanced and stuff to play, because most of the other maps we play, they're just really short, like Creep Arcade, like just like 5-10 minutes, And TGS games last like 1, 2, 3 hours even. So it would, polishing up some of the more grievous errors and mistakes and bugs and stuff like that, it kind of evolved into trying to actually like fix up some of the game systems in it and make it a little more balanced, especially since a lot like CMBW, we have a very closed community and very probably like similar in size actually. And that community is like the thing about CMBW, which I'll get into in just a second, is that the skill levels of the players all seem to be really similar, with the exception of myself. Whereas in our Warcraft 3 stuff, the skill levels are really, 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 really different. And there is, I believe, actually 2 casts I've made of that need to be put up and posted, and you'll see some of that in there again. And but it's sort of the same thing where it's like you only have so much sample data to work with when it comes to balancing stuff. So, people will say this or that, this is broken, this is that's broken, or whatever. And of course, you as a designer, your gut reflex is to say, well, just do this, just do that.
Yeah.
The answers to all hypothetical solutions already, except for certain cases where maybe you haven't really had a chance to experience this. And this is particularly a problem with stuff like StarCraft, because most of your testing is going to be done with AI, and that really doesn't prepare you whatsoever for dealing with PvP games and a lot of threads. It lets you really unit tests, like which compositions are effective, how certain maps might be played, how certain stages of the game might look. But because the AI is completely brain dead and you have to feed it money, and it can't, even with the macro or micro rather that you currently have, it's, they're like dancing on my spore colony because you said the hydras and the sunkens or something like that were slightly off over there somewhere, not even in range. The best solution you got is something that can be threatening because of the numbers and money it can throw at you. And so when it comes to PvP, things change completely differently, because a lot like I discovered in like D&D is people just will do shits, the strangest shit, even when they're like, like new. And especially when they're new, you start seeing really weird things.
Oh, yeah.
So, when it comes to like the Warcraft 3 map, the sample size is lower because it's much less play. and you still have to kind of like look at all these different abilities and the heroes and the way things are scaling or whatever, and try to make assessments based on what you see, what the feedback is, and then you have this gray area where you have to judge, the potentials of things. And I was with StarCraft, I have much more experience than that, than dealing with something like, MOBA clones or whatever. So, to me, it's good to see the, I'm looking for the word, like their reluctance to knee jerk. With CMBW, it's hard to judge. I think it is still in an extremely volatile state balance-wise, because as far as I understand, other than the Fraud Knight, this is the first time the project has seen real dedicated PvP play for any extended period of time.
Yeah, that would be correct.
But you still have a very small sample size.
Yes.
And what you're going to see more often than not is the players are going to be countering the players rather than countering the, really like exploiting like the stats of stuff. And it takes a very high skill level to really weed out individual imbalances on stuff really concretely, because you're always going to have, even in like mid-level, like say like C plus B minus, I cup level, you're going to see people who do not have the kind of economy or macro or whatever to really like bring out the full strength of certain builds or concepts, or even work maps in a certain way, which actually would be imbalanced at a high level. You may not see that at a low level. Such things can be attributed to skill differences. But at the same time, when you don't have, like, the thing about Brood War and the stuff like, the maps being designed certain ways or whatever to deal with certain perceived imbalances, is obviously Brood War has an absolutely massive community behind it, all these organizations, hundreds of professional players or whatever tackling it. So that the sample size for potential balancing related issues is much wider, especially when it's going to be the maps deciding the balance more so than the actual game, because there's no active development behind it and hasn't been for decades. So with this, it's much more difficult to achieve a happy middle ground, and you do have to kind of make some concessions that say, well, something like Apostles definitely on paper seems absolutely fucking busted when you can, for example, in the game that I casted, you stick the revive on all the Bactylisks, and now the Zerg has an army that is worth probably about 3 or 4 times the actual power budget that that Zerg invested into it. Is that really unbalanced? Like, what do they do with it? Now, I issued out some hypothetical situations where it's like, maybe they get tanks to apply more damage to them, but he did have other tier 2 units, and then, you enter all these hypothetical situations of what ifs and so on and so forth, and, maybe like look at their resources and say, well, Beaver maybe wasn't extracting enough gas in some of those expansions that I saw, or he had a lot of minerals that maybe could have made more sentinels or something like that. Maybe some sentinels inside of Kian's base might have made different. Like, you just get into this big murky terrain where you don't actually know if any of these things actually would make a difference, or if there's actually a legitimate problem with a balance that needs to be addressed or whatever. So it's really like, that's rough, and I don't think there's ever going to be a true happy balance with that. I think it'll always be something that you kind of like chasing. So you have to kind of like make a concession that you want to tackle the biggest, most obvious errant issues first, and it's certainly too early for that. So, but what I have noticed is that the player is kind of like tightened up the early game quite a lot since it started. I think that, like, for example, since they're more or less countering each other now, most of the players will know that I will do something really stupid early game, or will go for mid game, and they will know that because my multitasking is weak, I can't handle mid game, and they don't have to be aggressive anymore. So, but then you have someone like say like Shambler, who's very aggressive. He will always know that this will always work, so he doesn't need to change his build very much. But there is the occasional time I've cheesed him. All the wins I've taken from him are from cheese. So still very conscious about early scouting and lots of gas stealing to prevent that. So you get into those situations where players are countering the players, and really the only way that at that point you really get out of that is by having a larger player pool. But with the maps in particular, I think that as you start like chasing the tail of balance, you're probably going to be looking at a lot at maps, because they're all new maps and they're really, really different than regular StarCraft, and your resource system is completely different from StarCraft 2, and then it's just like it's all uncharted territory. So you don't really have a precedent to go on really like how any of this stuff like should be done, or at least was done, to have something to reflect us upon and say, this worked like that. So I have this precedent to look at and make assessments on how my changes might affect such a system and that, and I can apply what I've learned from that to this and have at least some expectations of how things will behave. It's the exact same issue I have with Apex X I'm going to be explaining in this video in regards to mobility and navigation and stuff like that. Is there is no precedent that was ever set for this. So I can't really like look at other examples and make designs and stuff based on those examples. And when you are in that situation, you have to resist knee-jerking as much as possible.
Yes, yeah.
So it's that's good to see. Again, I'm at the stage where to me it's like between when we start doing castovers and today, there's been changes like the die decks and stuff like that. And
sure, right.
They don't really influence me personally that much, and they kind of just wash over me because I still don't even know what half the shit at tier 2 even does.
Well, so that was going to be something that I brought up too, and I guess I can bring it up now as opposed to later. But like one of the things that we've definitely noticed, and I think you kind of hinted at it, or at least I immediately filled in this blank anyway when you were talking about those the games of the MOBA map that you're talking about that can go very long in Warcraft 3. Is like maybe that's really rare territory for the players to get to, and maybe as a result of that, like it's actually really hard to know what the good choices are at that level, at that scale, at that length, and also like hard for the designers to know.
It's also particularly a problem because in CMBW's case, if you have games with AI, they very often go into late game. And the way they go into late game is by stabilizing the map at around tier 2 or partway through tier 1, where you're going to hit tier 2 because it's longer now. Mm-hmm. Once you stabilize the map, it is very, very unlikely the AI will actually win, or if they do, it's going to be a very, very prolonged win through map presence. For example, the AI has like double or triple your expansions and eventually overwhelms you. But other than that, it's quite rare for the AI to actually get decisive victories past that point because they tend to like trickle in units in small amounts. There's never any super massive, big attack. And that means that the players who are teching at that point have a lot of time to like ease their way into that game. Whereas when it isn't a PvP game, individual actions tend to be much more decisive, individual attacks tend to be much more decisive, and you cannot prepare for it the same way at all.
Well, the AI can sometimes have a pretty big army, and I think it depends on the build and depends on like a lot of factors that can end up being effectively random. And also, for a good stretch of time, they were kind of bad at it. Whereas recently, I think there's been improvements in that front. But for sure, like the takeaway is that AIs do generally lack decision making insofar as they can't really be decisive, but they also can't adapt, and so they're very rigid in what they end up doing. And it's like if you lose, especially an early game approach, like you're trying to be super aggro, and they just happen to build counter you or blind counter you, I guess would be another way to put it. Then yeah, okay, well I guess I have to now play a macro game, and obviously that favors the AI not just because they have the resource multiplier, but also because they have multitasking like down pat. They will micro all of their units, and to the degree that that's effective is sort of dependent on the situation. They will obviously macro all the time, order workers all the time, expand all the time, tech up and build production and all this. So they can be quite effective at just building a ton of stuff, and then sometimes that can be overwhelming. However, the other thing to note is, I think the main thing to take away from the PvP angle is that yeah, you have to be aware of playstyles, and through prolonged exposure, that does mean that you do develop a sort of meta of somebody's, like an understanding of somebody's character, who they are, what they like to do. And when you're playing against players, and you do have to contend with the fact that like your opponent actually has focus and APM instead of just being an AI, one of the things that also equates to, and I think this is really interesting, it's something I try to use very much myself, is if you can just like send a unit to like some unguarded base and like not really do too much, but you like sap at the attention economy, that can be enough to like get you an advantage somewhere else. And like, especially if you have like say some light air units that are probably just going to die to some defenses. If you hit like 3 or 4 bases with 1 air unit each as you're attacking with the main offense, like that can just be really scrambling the brain of your opponent. And it's obviously even better if you can actually mount like potentially threatening harassment opportunities at the same time as your main attack, because your opponent can only react to certain things at any given time. Yeah. Like AI are better at that, but also they would still need to at least move units over there to do it. So it even still works against AI to some degree, but it's way more effective against a player, especially at the level we're playing at right now, where it's not very high for people who don't know. The skill level that we display we definitely should have better APM. Definitely should try to improve our ability to multitask and improve our ability to proactively scout and stuff. And I do see that slowly happening, although the cast over that just went live today shows a general lack of proactive scouting in a lot of the games. But that's something that can, because it's so important, I think players will naturally start to focus on that as they get more familiar with the basics and get they're a little bit easier to, find it easier to focus on the early game. And as you said, that has indeed tightened up. To the extent that they're countering each other or trying to develop a meta against each other, it is at least working insofar as they're not going to fall over to a cheese most often now. So, and when it does happen, it gets sort of, what do you call it? You really you remember that sticks in your craw and you're like, okay, how can I make sure 100% I'm not? So one of the things that we started to talk about is the Wraith rushes. I was, we broke down that exact game that happened versus Kian, and you destroyed him with Wraiths. And that's a case where actually he could have divined that, there's gas harvesting, but only a barracks.
Just the fact you are hiding the building alone. Yeah. The fact you don't see any production building and there's no expansion against someone who typically doesn't fast expand, you really can infer a lot of things. That's one of the reasons why you see me, if I scout the Zerg and I see the spawning pool and gas, I always build a turret, and there's many times I'll just instinctively build a turret anyway. Sometimes it comes a little slow. Right. The game before that, when I managed to kill the Nathracores with Madrigals, there was that period where I didn't have the Madrigals.
Yes.
But eventually, you saw me just suddenly switch to building anti-air right away. A little later than it should have, but eventually it did click, because I think he never tried to break out of his base, so he's going to try to air. Right. So I just instinctively started building air later than I should have, and there was definitely a window where I could have most certainly lost that as a result of that. But you'll see that a lot, because where you are, and this is kind of probably going to be the evolution you're going to start seeing, is that people will start inferring a lot of these things.
Yes. Yeah.
When you reach a more or less stable state where they're not losing to cheese in the first 5 minutes all the time. And you will start seeing people try to tilt each other a lot. So one of the few games out of so many I managed to beat Shambler on, it was because I managed to tilt him. Okay. And the way I did that was with a very, very successful early harass with a worker, just constantly getting in his shit. I think I managed to interrupt the building once or twice. And this just gets annoying as hell. That's why they do gas steals too, right?
Right.
And usually when he takes my gas, I just ignore it, and then once or twice it lets the geyser finish, and he doesn't get his money back. But when you if especially a successful worker harass was able to delay him just long enough that I could actually get the early advantage, and you will see that a lot. I like to prey on people like that. I like to try to make them tilt. I'm not at the control level with Brood War where I could do that now, but I definitely could do that with StarCraft 2. And you'll see that come up, because once people more or less understand how each other's works, you're going to see that they're going to try to tilt each other. Because especially when you start reaching mid-level, you will reach a comfort spot where you kind of understand the game, you kind of understand what you need to do and what you want to do, but you can't handle pressure. And not just pressure of constantly being attacked, but something constantly heckling you over and over and over again. Something that disrupts that tempo that you're accustomed to doing. And in CMBW, it's particularly easy to do that, because you can get those early air units, and they don't need to be fatal when they attack you. You don't need to all in Nathracores to really set someone off. As I mentioned in that 2 versus 2, both sides had all these expansions that were basically untouched.
Right.
And if, for example, you had been getting constantly harassed by Bargus in those bases over and over and over again, it would have sapped a lot of your attention to deal with that. It could have delayed your attacks. It could have given Kian a chance to get back in the economy game, or otherwise be more defensive if he was able to multitask on top of it. And it wouldn't have even required extensive investment. But not really. A lot of people aren't really, I don't think, at the stage where they kind of think of it that way. And it may be a little while before you get to that point. But when the game becomes I think it's already like stabilized a lot, especially since I've played it before. But when it comes more stable in their play styles, and like I think for example, Shambler, or at least with Zerg, has a very stable play style, and then that's when you reach the point where you can unhinge it. And that's kind of like this. I think the skill level, or at least the familiarity with the project, a lot of people are kind of like reaching. And like I actually see that with Veek too. Actually, he kind of, to me, he seems like he's very easy to put on tilt.
Oh yeah,
in some of those
sure.
PvP games, and I'm not sure the exact methodology because I haven't played against him hardly at all. But out of the few games I played with him, it seemed like it was easy to put him on tilt. So
that's
like
kind
of like
if he was on game, right? If he wasn't on tilt, like he could be one of the strongest players we have. Like he could probably be better than me skill wise. He maybe not strategically, but like in terms of his he doesn't micro very well, but he macros pretty well. It's just that like if you put him off kilter, he becomes like a 50% worse player sometimes because he's just raging. So that can't happen.
It was like a lot of the people I played League with,
right,
were like gold, platinum tier, and they were probably, if they really focused on it and didn't have tilting issues, they could get to diamond pretty easily.
Yeah,
just like I could.
I mean, listen, it's monkeys all the way up in League. At least it was when I played. Like when I hit Diamond 2 or Diamond 3 or whatever it was, which was like, I don't know, top 0.1% of NA players. It's like, that sounds like a statistic and an achievement, and it's great, but actually it wasn't. Like all I did was just like, not all I did like study the game pretty well, but you know, it's just like, oh, let me just all in on some aggressive junglers and kill the enemy, and then like they put them behind, and when they're behind, especially if they're not familiar, like I think the key takeaway from the tilt angle is also like, it's not just
people
that
can't
you're
play
pressuring
from behind.
them. Yeah, they are not comfortable usually playing from a disadvantage. And when they are not comfortable, like it really does require you to rise above and to get to take advantage. The ball's in your court. If you don't take initiative and like take advantage of somebody else's mistake, like that's what Brood War is so good about in general, like between CMBW and just regular Brood Wars. It's not about making like, what is it? It's not about playing a perfect game. It's just about making less mistakes than your opponent. That's usually how it breaks down. And the significance of that is that if you have made a mistake and it is capitalized upon by your opponent, all you need to do is capitalize on your opponent's mistake to get even. Like that can happen. And even in CMBW, that still can happen. And like a lot of the games that I saw just recently, it's like the game wasn't over when they GG'd out. They just kind of gave up. And that's another factor of tilt, right? It's like, oh, I guess it's just over. Or really, you probably could have held off and maybe looked for that comeback. You know, maybe it just ends up being that you lose 10 minutes later, but that's still an opportunity for you to fire back because maybe your opponent goes on tilt, or maybe you can do something.
That's why I roach like crazy in FFAs, because I've been through so many FFAs in all these games where I come back from 1CC and I win the game an hour later. I didn't win in these ones because I don't know what I'm doing, and I couldn't handle some stuff like the die deck harass was I didn't know how to deal with that, and I was too behind economically against it. It became like a 1v1 because that other guy didn't have his RTS legacy under his belt. And he just was huffing cocaine or something the entire time. So it was basically a 1v1 and I was too far behind. But those games came from positions where I had literally nothing for a huge chunk of the game to get back to that point where I could be one of the following contenders. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention in regards to that is with CMBW, I think, especially in my case, and probably for other people, it can be hard to know when you're behind because there's so many new things and there's so many potential choices, and the economy game is so much different. For me, it's kind of hard to judge the map. Like when I was playing against Kian in many of those matches, because he would flounder so many of his attacks and I would get so many kills in, I was like, he must be really struggling because he's being really desperate with his attacks. Turns out he has 7 fucking bases on the map that for some reason I never found, even though I was scouting around now and then. And then, like, I would have some weird control issue with the Goliaths, and I would lose, and I'd be like, okay, I'm probably fucked. But I feel like that if I had a better control issue later on, I could have still come back from that. But other times, like against the Zerg, it was like I had no real idea, like, what to do at this stage. When I saw in the middle, I just was like, I don't know how to get out of this position and put myself in an advantageous position anymore. So I just didn't know really what I should do.
Right.
And it will take, because of the depth of it available in terms of your choices, I think it will take a long time to reach a stage where you will be able to answer those questions more accurately.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that I feel like one of the ways that is best to start learning at least potential solutions, because even if you try something and then it doesn't work, that's more data to work from. If you just GG out when you could have extended the game by like 10 minutes, which like in your case, you actually, I mean, I think you just know this implicitly, so you don't do this, where like you really only GG out when it actually is like he's attacking your production and you've got nothing else or whatever, you know, like in that situation, okay, game's over. But even if it's like unlikely that you are going to win, if you can at least gather more data about what might be effective, and also you can use your opponent's hubris against them if they think they've won. Like, you know, that's something that ends up working out. I think that's what Kian tried to do in the game that you ended up containing him and then beating him, is he tried to make it seem like, oh, it's so unlikely that I could possibly win this game, so maybe my opponent will get complacent in some way. Yeah. And, you know, could have taken a window of opportunity had he attacked a bit earlier with the air units, the Nathacores, to, you know, punish you in that respect. So there's all these, like, things that develop as you play the game, and as you, like, the more games you play and the longer those games go, the more data you end up having. And I think that's why we've seen the early game tighten up, but the mid game becomes like this crazy beast that you can't control, because people haven't gotten to the mid game as often, and now we're starting to see that more often. Starting to see strats and you know, like tempo and the ability to build some sort of interesting composition. Like in the cast over that just went out, the last game involves mixing two separate tier 2 units. Well, I guess two separate tier 2 structures and a bunch of units from each structure, and it creates this really formidable composition, which is not like it's not that you can't contend with it, but it's like, because they combine two separate structures, it gives them an advantage that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Whereas if you decide to go instead from like, okay, I'm just going to get stuff from one structure, it might not be as effective. And that's exactly what the loser of that particular match ends up finding out, is that, oh shit, like, actually, I like, because I didn't mix, you know, a bunch of tier 2 stuff, I couldn't have competed against a bunch of tier 2 stuff that was a mix from my opponent. And so that's just more data for them to then come back to, is like knowing that that's a possibility. I mean, in this particular example, it was, you know, there was a unit that was just like, so the other person didn't even remember that it existed. And that's another thing. It's like, okay, well, as you play the game more, you'll find that out, right? But yeah. So yeah, it's just there's so many options. You said the depth of choices is quite immense. And that definitely contributes to player unfamiliarity. And you know, the early game, it still is super different from default StarCraft and from any other RTS, but the fact that you get to experience a decent amount of it, because it doesn't take as long to get to, you can rapid fire a bunch of 1v1s that last maybe under 10 minutes each and learn a decent amount about how the early game progresses.
With me and Shambler, it was typically under 5 minutes each.
Right, yeah. Well, he found a good build to get like a 5 Hydra timing. And the response to that, usually you only have like maybe 2 Vultures and 2 Goliaths or something by then. And you can win if you do your right minds, but you know, that's like a harassment /
like half the games I like fucked up my rallies without realizing it.
Oh,
and
right,
like my Drakdins or whatever would just walk into his Hydras and be like, what the fuck are you doing over there?
Yeah.
And then it would just be over.
Right, yeah.
It happened more in the future. Or then there was a couple matches where I didn't pay attention to the map. I was trying to kite him, and I walked into a corner and got pins, and I was like, "Oh, there's a wall here."
Yeah, I remember that. I was on Dead Ringer. Yeah, so yeah, that's
a couple of them.
That's a rough case. So, I mean, that's another thing, is like map awareness, learning the maps as well. You did comment that like the maps specifically will be a huge linchpin, and so chasing the tail of balance. And I do agree. I think the games we've seen on Terminus, which is the Twilight 1v1 map, have generally been a lot better than the games that we've seen on some of the other 1v1 maps, including like maps that I've made. And so I think the takeaway there is not necessarily that all maps have to be like Terminus, but that Terminus represents an example of like this particular
Yeah, you want to look
structure.
At why they're different.
Right. Yeah. And then what?
And I think a part of it is the fact you can take a second base and it's not like super easily harassed by anything but air.
Yeah, well, I mean, even air units on Terminus, because the bases are up against like one of the borders of the map, or in the case of the back base, there's 2 borders. It's in a corner. You actually can't really harass that too easily, because you don't have room to go behind the minerals, because the minerals are almost up against the edge of the map. So that also helps a lot with
even with the Cantors, I had a little bit of time to react and save the CC and some of the workers. So.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And also, you know, like that's the other thing too, is that like, do you want to have the maps that like basically it is harder to be the defensive player on maps that are more open and easily harassable, but also like, do you want to not ever have anything like that? Because then maybe like,
it really depends on your goals, right? Like, do you want games to be slower early on, or, you know, maybe you just have a diverse map pool and just leave it to that? But yeah, the maps definitely impact that a lot. And it really is going to be like, what do you really want? out of your game because, Blizzard wants their game to be solved in like 5 minutes. So they just completely removed their other game completely.
Yeah.
But, they don't have a game really at all to begin with. So they were just like, the game is bad. Just make it faster. That'll make it more epic. And it didn't. So it's like,
yeah.
but you don't, half of your changes in the recent times are to extend tier 1. So, you might think about what is better ways to facilitate that, but maybe not have the game be quite as much of, I can hide a Stargate or whatever and end the game really fast. But again, then it comes down to like the player skill. Like there's a lot of shit you can infer just by the fact someone's hiding tech.
Yeah.
So again, it just goes back to before when I was saying it can be really difficult to find a medium where you can really judge this stuff. But I do feel like it is going in a good direction with those changes so far.
Yeah,
wasn't happy about having my SCVs being stuck without realizing it. I had no idea you were talking to me in that whisper, and I am much too like scatterbrained to look at the SCV somewhere.
Well, what happened is you got pretty unlucky because both of the Masons got decollided into that corner after building each reservoir.
I was thinking my gas is so much worse than it should be, and I knew
Yeah.
I was forgetting about that other expansion, but it was like I have like
Yeah, you
three
have three capped
geysers
ones,
and the one other one, and where are my fucking SCVs? What are they doing? And
Yeah.
then eventually I looked there and they were out smoking weed.
They were spinning, dude. So here's the other thing, right? One of the things that you had mentioned, I can't remember which channel it was in, but it was on the Discord server. And one of the things you had mentioned was the CMBW is a wild game pacing wise because you like it can be super fast in terms of how like aggressive you can be in the early game, but if you survive that, it becomes like a completely different game once tier 2 starts showing up. And
because the tier 2 units,
right.
they functionally are very, like just with the Terran, for example, just between the Madrigal and the tank, they're really, really functionally different than a lot of stuff. Like the Madrigal, I think, is one of the strongest like multi-role units because it's also very mobile, but it's also really fragile too. So, and the fact it has such a large hit collision to it means that it can still quite easily die to Nether cores, as I've discovered. If it gets caught on your Vultures or Goliaths like mine did, then it'll just instantly evaporate. But however, the offensive power of it is absolutely crazy. So like and then just between that and I haven't gotten the chance to really mess around with tanks too much. My tank micro is never too good, but just between those two, the way you play it is so much different than with Brood War and Goliaths and Vultures. Because Goliaths and Vultures are literally just there. Goliaths were there just to kill air and then just be a wall of health, and Vultures were pretty much there just to be a wall of health for the tanks to keep them alive. But now the way that you interact with what is a very conventional setup otherwise is just completely different. And that's before you get to the fact that if you want to have like ant seals there to also give more defensive options and also spot for you on ledges and stuff like that. So it just the way that you play between those, and you don't have to rely so much on spellcasters is really the most important part of it. There are some spellcasters, I haven't really messed around with them too much, but before with Terran, it's like irradiates and then worrying about like Psystorm and Dark Swarm, and those are just very binary things. It's like get out of Psystorm or everything dies. Get out of Dark Swarm or everything dies. Irradiate something, it's just fucking dead and you can't do anything about it.
You should
so
point and
it's
click. Really
they're just
silly.
they're really just unhealthy, dumb abilities, really. Too binary. I don't have any idea what most of the abilities do within this, but even though the Madrigal is still like ridiculously strong, it's very much more positionally dependent. So the way that you play the game is much more akin to my Apex projects, and there was a good reason why I was designing it that way. Is because it's much more skill oriented to play. So when you hit tier 2, there's a massive power spike once you get a couple minutes into it and actually start using that. And the way that the game changes at that point is very massive because although the kill threat of a lot of units in tier 1 like Hydras is still very high, when you hit tier 2, the kill threat for stuff becomes even higher and their power budget just jumps in a way that is not reflected in Brood War all the way up until tier 3. But the tier 3 units in Brood War are very simple. Like the BCs just have an auto attack and then a spellcast nuke. Carriers just kind of sit there. And, the carriers in this just kind of sit there too. But
Hey, they sit there
Most
with
of the units
12
behave
stewards
more
by the way.
distinctly.
Yeah.
And the other major thing, of course, is that damage types are gone.
Yep.
So is the I most of the time I don't even get a chance to look at the damage or armor pen stuff does. But even despite the fact I haven't really looked at those too much, I can usually infer what stuff does just by how it behaves. You can't really do that in StarCraft that easily because of the damage types. It just adds this extra wall of shit you have to kind of like figure out. Like, oh, it turns out ghosts have a rifle but are actually shit at killing anything besides like Zerglings.
Yeah.
So, you're only going to be using them for spell casting, and that just is not interesting. So, yeah, it's when you hit tier 2, you get into more of those innate behaviors, and then the game absolutely changes quite significantly.
What I find really compelling about... So, first of all, I think some people might say... might be worried about a game that changes that radically depending on like the tech level or whatever. But I actually, I think it's actually really cool that you have this level of like.
I mean,
activity.
considering the time it takes to get there, it's not really a radical change. It's just an evolution.
Right. Well, so I would just say like you were describing it as like it feels like it becomes almost a different game in some aspects, and I actually think that that's neat in some ways because it means that like, I mean, for one, you have time to respond. Usually, like a lot of the tier 2 options. The tier 2 options that are super mobile in general come from like tier 2.5, which is an even greater investment. Whereas the tier 2 options that are like more immediately accessible are a little bit slower and, more stat bally oriented or whatever. You want a lot of them. And so you can like scout that army moving around instead of just dying to it because it immediately arrives. So if you scout that your opponent has tier 2, you can get to it yourself at least in time to start responding to a threat if it's starting to move over, right? And so there's that natural ebb and flow, push and pull of like how the armies work and like, scouting and etc. The other thing is that I actually think it's really neat that you always have the opportunity to be threatening and do something in the early game, but it's not like, you can actually choose to eschew some of that if you want to get for a macro style and just maybe bunker up or defend or whatever, and limited harassment while, saving a lot of your gas so that you can tech up faster and then use that as your agency. Like there's both play styles are possible. And I generally think that it's in a very interesting state because of the fact that the game can change so radically based on that. Or as you said, it maybe not so radically. It's just as an evolution. Like I actually really like that dynamic so far. And I was just wondering if you had thoughts on it or if it was like even something that you had considered much as far as like because it is a very different way to change the stakes of the game or change how the game evolves. It's very different than like most RTS games go, where it's just this very slow, but or maybe not so slow, but this gradual progression up instead of it just being this massive sort of spike as you described it.
Well, Apex was going to have something very similar. It was going to have a lot of tech tiers, but they were going to be similarly very expensive. It was going to be a very large scale game. And those tech tiers tended to unlock, again, like artillery, tactical missiles, mass fabricators, and other sorts of like really major stuff. And there was always the idea for me that, you wanted to become more higher scale, of course, because it is an RTS. It's by design supposed to have high scale. So you want to have breakpoints where you can leap ahead and scale. And, for like the Gracians, it was similar, very more similar to Terran in the sense that you had some vehicles and some infantry at tier 1. And there was, I believe I actually did have air at tier 1. It was just quite expensive. Mm-hmm. And you hit tier 2, and tier 2 was a little cheaper comparatively to CMBW tier 2. But once you hit tier 2 and then you invested, then you start talking about the gunships with the multi-attacks and some of the support air units and the heavy tanks, the Medusa tanks with long-range AoE. They were like super siege tanks. And you hit tier 3, and then you just jump up straight into corvettes. And corvettes in this, the smallest ship is like equivalent to the battlecruiser in Brewer, except the corvettes had the rail cannon barrage. They had the long-range missile barrage. They were a very, very micro-intensive unit and required a lot of focus fire and stuff to maximize their damage. They were really strong. And, you just jumped up from tier 2 to tier 3 in scale. And then by the time you hit tier 10, you're looking at literally building mechanical planets. So these massive constructs. And then for the RN, the ISN, you were looking at the Raven, which is going to be more like the original Raven and not like the really shitty nerf version they have now, but with missiles that could be shot down. So that was my way of balancing them, was making them attackable versus making them stupid. And then you hit the, I think their tier 3 equivalent was called the Crowfather, actually.
Me?
And that one actually spawned entire missile platforms. It spawned like miniature space stations instead of just defense drones. And the stations were actual structures that had their own weapons and shit. And, you know, you were talking about like their basic artillery had different attacks for units and then for buildings. They had siege rockets and then they had scatter rockets for units. And you just, again, had all this behavior-driven stuff. But when you hit the next tier, you would see this massive jump in the utilities and options that individual units had. And that was my main way of expressing power budget, was rather than just making a unit better at a certain thing, just doing damage, they could do damage in different ways. They could do more damage to more targets. They had other kinds of utility. Utility was really like the big power spike, and then the scale would jump up with it. And like the sizes buildings would get bigger, the size of units would get bigger, the options that you had, like again, being able to generate resources and stuff with structures was massive. And that to me, just like there was never any other choice, because that's what the RTS is. The RTS is about large scale. You know, Warcraft 3 and Dawn of War and all these shitty knockoffs, all these fakers, they're not RTSs, they're RTTs, and RTTs are inherently about low scale. They're about hard counters, they're about little ground control, they're about like 20, 30 units at a time in the map. They're not RTSs. So I never even like looked at that. And when I looked at regular StarCraft, like, yeah, the tech jumps were kind of massive too, where you built the science facility and suddenly you went from having wraiths to having battlecruisers. But the battlecruisers just weren't interesting units.
Right.
They were supposed to be like 2-kilometer long ships. And they attacked with a single laser that made the exact same sound that the regular Wraith laser made. And like, you could do more. You could do so much more. But they didn't. So my goal with it is I wanted every unit to feel powerful. I wanted everything to feel satisfactory to use. And I started right off with my revamp for the Marine. You saw that new muzzle flash I made for it and stuff like that. Right prior to I switched to Unreal and ditched that whole project completely, is I redid the Marine very significantly and made a completely custom muzzle flash and everything for him. Just the whole goal is to make him feel powerful. Because you wanted, at your ground level, you wanted something to feel powerful. And then each tier should represent a big step upwards.
Yep.
You should really feel the impact of that investment with what it offers you. If you are advancing in the tech tree and you're not feeling a massive difference between that tech tree and then the last one, it has no reason to exist.
And, you know, one of the ways that you can accomplish that feeling of advancement is also not necessarily through just having more, like, raw power statistically or whatever. I think the easy example of this is the Sovroleth, which everybody has very fond memories of. And like
the
that's
utility
a unit,
of the Sovroleth, yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, it creates more of itself from consuming corpses, and it obviously gets increased range but lower movement speed the more it is. Like, it starts to turn into this singular organism in some ways. And the interesting thing about the Sovroleth is that it's not individually very statistically significant. That's why you get two of them per egg. It's like you get this benefit, and one of the main ways that it ends up, like, basically I look at the Sovroleth and it's like a really good test case for like a swarm type unit at tier 3. It's not a stat ball. It doesn't have like crazy power individually. It doesn't even have really crazy power as a pair, which is what you get for one purchase. And it's like, yeah, you can actually choose to just get a bunch of Sovroleths and then, you know, sweep through the map, and maybe it works out pretty well actually because of how powerful they are. But you need them in numbers, and that's where it becomes more interesting.
And you need some setup for them, yeah.
Yeah. So like they don't work. Like one of the things that I've really enjoyed about how the PvP games have borne out is that you don't really like if you were able to win with a single unit type masked, you were probably against an opponent that didn't pressure you very much. Because actually these units thrive most when they have, like, if they're a damaging unit like the Hydralisk or even like the Madrigal, they mostly benefit from having a front line or something to draw attention away from them so that they can dish out the damage. And like, it's no mistake that the Iziricor, which is the frontline unit from the Hydrock Den, is more of a singular unit that can be focused down pretty heavily, which, surprise, surprise, is also one of the ways to focus down Hydras because of the surface area they have. They don't take too much damage from AoE in the same way, at least at tier 1. But meanwhile, if you don't have AoE, because you're trying to counter the Hydras, because maybe you went Drakodins or Goliaths or something, and then you go into Zethrakors from a different tech structure entirely, that is when the Hydras can be more useful, because now they've got like these small spammy units that can act as the front line and distract. And it's like, it's no mistake, right? It's no accident that the Hydrock Den doesn't enable something that like covers all of the weaknesses of the Hydralisk, because that would just be like the obvious go-to. You always build that. Yeah. These individual structures offer you some interesting options, but you would never really want to stick with to just one of them. And that's like an extension of the same principle that I said earlier, where you don't want to just win by massing a unit, because if you can mass a single unit and win versus an even skill player who played well in that match, then maybe that single unit is problematic in some way for balance. But if you can also just win the game like on a fairly long time frame, like say above 10 minutes, with only one tech structure or only one production structure being used, then that might also be an indication that maybe that's a little bit overtuned, right? And it's the same way. It's like you want to be creating interesting compositions in order to solve the problems with your composition and in order to answer your opponents. So that's sort of another extension of the same philosophy anyway. And I think I have enjoyed that you don't really get to just spam one unit anymore. Like, you used to be able to spam Naths. You used to be able to, like, people figured out responses to those, and also Nathrakors. I mean, they didn't get statistically nerfed. It's just a little bit of a time cost increase. So, yeah, ultimately it feels to me like you could probably benefit in many ways from, you know, mixing a bunch of units together instead of just having one unit type, and mixing a bunch of tech structures or production structures together that are distinct from each other. That also, you know, is another level of, interesting compositions that, you know, solve many problems. And I think that so far we've not really encountered any obvious errors with that particular philosophy, right? It's like, yeah, there's some units that were maybe overtuned or undertuned, and they'll continue to be adjusted as we get more games with them, especially in like the tier 2 area. I guarantee you there's going to be a bunch of units, and maybe even more so in the tier 3 area, where it's like there are some units that are just not very competitive. We haven't really seen
tier 3 at all.
Right.
Like, so. I think the only one in the castovers is maybe Kian had some tier 3 in that Zerg, or he was trying to get tier 3, but it ended before then.
Yeah, I think he was morphing it or something by the end of the game, but he didn't really use it, right? So
that's there was so many broodlings. I was like, what the fuck are these even coming from?
Yeah, those are from the convolisks, which apply.
There's like two of them, like the queen spawn broodlings, and then the convolisks spawn broodlings. So
right.
When I saw those, I knew what those did, but I didn't know that he had like queens on top of it. And it was like, I don't know what these even would do, even if I did see them.
Right. So yeah, that's just one of those things.
Not much exposure to them.
As you get more options, right? You get like more times, more sample size. We'll get more answers to, like, you know, are some of these units well designed? Are some of these units, you know, well thought out? Are they good statistically or what? And like, I don't know. This is I know this is a controversial take even among people in the community, but I honestly just feel like numbers are fucking useless for like evaluating stuff. Like you said earlier,
they're very
like
useless.
You don't really need to look at all the values of like armor, pen, and damage. You just like look at the behavior and say like, okay, well here's
like it's helpful to know them.
Yes, yeah.
But there's a reason why I haven't focused on numbers very much in the game, because I'm not at the level where numbers make a huge difference to me.
Well,
like, there's times where I don't know that something
right?
attacks ground or air.
Yes,
like in that first FFA where I attacked like Shambler or whatever, and half my army couldn't even attack his air, and I'm like, uh-oh, I made a terrible mistake. But you know, it's like it wouldn't have made a difference in that case if something did 35 damage or 40 damage.
Right.
There was many other factors influencing at that point. Numbers is probably like the last thing you really want to be looking at.
Right.
Other than in like you start looking at numbers when like you're dealing with Nathrakor cheese. It's that's when you start thinking, are they actually overpowered? Is there issues with the way they attack, their speed, their build times, vision range, whatever you want to do. But the only time you start doing that is when you start seeing this. Because, you know, there's a million different influences. Like, what if I'm floating like 500 gas and suddenly there's like Nather cores in my base. There was something more I could have done to deal with it if I had that many resources, right? So yeah, numbers are kind of. I've always been really opposed to looking at things from a number first perspective because numbers are a very like nebulous thing. There's too many things that surround numbers just to look at numbers first.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So like obviously you do need to design with numbers in mind to some degree where you can at least like you need the numbers to make sense for what the unit's intention is, but I just feel like if you understand that intuitively because you're the designer and you sort of can hold the game in your head as far as like how it plays out and you can sort of map it out, then your familiarity will guide you to like what a sensible number is. And if that sensible number isn't so sensible, it will be revealed after testing. Like the reason why the Nather cores were adjusted is because we saw obvious cases of it needing adjustment. So I think that that's fine. And that's like all you need to know. But like the other thing is if, like you said, there was some obvious thing that you could have done to respond to it, like you had a bunch of gas that you didn't spend or you didn't scout or whatever the case may be, like at that point, that's not a signal to me necessarily that the numbers need to change. It's more of a signal that like the players need to, just play better, just lower the difficulty by becoming
Again,
better.
It's one of the things that makes balancing actually hard because you can internalize all these numbers, and it's certainly a critical skill to have a general assessment in your head of how the numbers are all interacting. But all the other, especially in a PvP, all the other dynamic elements are changing how those numbers actually impact the game.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's loads of factors and thinking that if there's a problem that like +2 damage or something would solve, I don't know. Like I'm kind of torn on that one because I do think some example units like the Nather core if they actually did like I don't know 10% less damage, they would probably be trash units. So they are kind of like riding a line where it's like they are fragile or like precariously balanced or whatever in terms of the.
Well, that's what happens when you're dealing with armor penetration too, is because your numbers are not getting buck broken by all these stupid percentages all over the damn place.
Yeah.
Changing individual numbers actually does make a tremendous difference on them. Because in Warcraft 3, it doesn't make a damn of a difference if a unit does 100 or 150 damage. This really isn't much difference at all because the way the armor system is governing all this stuff has much more relevance to it. And because units have so much fucking health and combat is so slow, even the armor system doesn't even necessarily influence a lot. And it gets to the point where the value of numbers at all period is just washed down. And you don't even really look at numbers at all anymore. In this, it's like the numbers are very tight because of armor penetration, but I think you look more at how armor penetration works rather than actual damage in a lot of stuff, especially in early game. And especially when you're considering like Nather cores. Is how much armor this stuff has. And then when you have the system that is simplified like that and much more coherent like that, then making changes to those numbers is really easy, and it's just a lot less brain work to hash out how to address individual issues. Like the Spraith colony is dying too fast. Is what, like 1 armor, 25 health or something like that?
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing.
Like they definitely felt better now. Although I haven't used them extensively, it's just like the 1 armor alone should make a world of difference. And it's like that's a change you can't make in like Warcraft 3 because it's not really going to have much of an impact against all the fucking percentage values and everything.
Yeah, I mean the other thing to note is that in the specific case of Zerg static defense, I'm considering issues where it's like you lose a worker to build it, but also once you build it, if the follow through doesn't kill the Kagran because of the way that Zerg regression works, where it just turns back into the structure it came from, you can rebuild it at a much cheaper cost than anybody else's static defense. So it's kind of a multi-layered analysis there where it's like maybe the Spraith colony is under strength for 1 Spraith colony's cost in total because it's like 50 for the worker, 75 for the Kagran, 50 more for the Spraith. That's a decent amount of decent chunk of change. But if you get more morphs out of it, it actually becomes even more cost efficient than any other static defense. Like increasingly, it's just a matter of like can your Kagran underneath it survive enough? So yeah, there's more things to maybe be adjusted there, or I could see things being adjusted there. But really, probably the main thing that I would say about static defense in the current status is We just need like more tier 2 and tier 3 options, so that you like this. The Terrans feel pretty solid with Sentinels. It's a mineral sink, and it obviously is beefier than individual Watchdogs. Although against some air threats, like it's actually worse, but against general threats, because it can also target ground, it's pretty good. Whereas like I do think that the other races lack that. They obviously also lack an ion cannon, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
They don't really have tier 2 defenses. So.
Right.
Are you planning to add higher tier defenses to the other races?
Yeah, I'm planning on. So Terran are going to get a bunker at tier 3, like another bunker type.
That also flies, presumably.
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh
and the Protoss will get a. I definitely think they need something that deals single target damage at a range, kind of like the Sentinel. People don't know this, but the Sentinel has been bugged for a while now and doesn't deal AOE.
Isn't it supposed to do a line trace? Or something?
It's a line. It's supposed to go to max range, and just for some reason it doesn't. And
it used to.
Yes, it used to, and then I probably broke it, and now Veek has to fix it. So good luck with that, buddy.
Where has Veek been?
He's been Crazy Mountain, I think. I don't know. He's almost back. He's almost back.
Damn polls.
The good news is that there will be like once the Sentinel behavior is restored, it will retain its identity as like sort of a like area damage, but mostly it's like positional dependent, and obviously has the long distance attack and whatnot. And then I can have a single target railgun type thing for the Protoss at a higher tier. As like, you get the Matrix, which works well against like crowds. And then there will be this one that's more like, condensed longer range and stuff. So that'll happen for Protoss. I'm thinking of at least one other static defense structure for Protoss. And then for Zerg, I know there's going to be a few options. Maybe it'll end up just being a greater Spraith or something. Like you could imagine progressive evolutions of that. Since that's a theme for like their central tech node and also their production structures. Well, I guess there's not any more progressive. It's just one. You just pick between the two. But you can imagine like, the Spraith colony morphs into another version of itself that deals maybe like has a bounce attack is like an obvious one that I thought of. And that would probably be unlocked at tier 2. So yeah, there's going to be options for sure. One of the things that I really want to do is I think we need some form of building-based detection for all races. Or maybe at the very least, like Terran will probably get it because the Ovaleth is available without a tech structure. The Witness is something you want to get anyway because it's cloaked, it's really powerful. And obviously the Embassy gives you another worker production queue, so it's like really good. So for sure there will be a detection tower type deal that isn't sensor tower because that's AIDS and stupid and esports. And I don't know why the fuck it's in the game, but there will be a high sight range tower that also detects, and that will be something that you can get for probably a hefty price tag, but will help you like lock down your base from cloaked threats. And the reason why it's going to be costly is because it basically allows, like, it neutralizes one of the advantages of cloaked units in CMBW that they don't have to reveal themselves unless they attack. So you can, like, I've started to do this myself, and I've seen some other players do this. If they play Terran, they can drop a star pad and do a Wraith, and basically just, as long as they keep waypointing it around so it doesn't stop to attack, it just behaves like a Witness, right? So neutralizing that is going to, like, automatically, basically, with no APM cost, is going to be a big deal, and so it should be costed and tiered appropriately. So I think that will be tier 2 for Terran, but it might require a Fountainhead, or maybe it'll end up just being tier 3, but leaning towards Fountainhead tech, and we'll just see how that goes. But yeah, so there's still some things in flux at tier 2 and tier 3, but I am happy about the way that tier 1 and the initial progression towards tier 2 works, and we just have to get more sample size for the rest to figure out what needs to be done, right?
Mm-hmm. One of the levels is micro and steroids. Like every unit is healed by 100 monks simultaneously, so you need to destroy their buildings to reduce their, quote, morale. The AI is turned off, so you need to hit a building on one side of the map, so they go there. They run to your boat to the other side, destroy 2 buildings by the time they come, and rinse and repeat for 3, because 3 different AI factions. Age of Empires 2 sounds like a game, yeah.
Well, every now and then we look at the competition in the RTS space and we say, what competition? Because there's no fucking RTS.
That's it's really like I don't even really understand half of that, but like anytime I think about RTS campaigns, I just feel like throwing up, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that, like, even though our AI is dumb, as we've both commented on in this very podcast, I am hoping that some single player content will, at the very least, be competitive enough to, like, like the AI currently kills bad players, even in 1v1s, and that's good. Like, if you're sub 100 APM, and you don't really know what the hell you're doing and you don't expand or whatever, you will die to the AI even in a 1v1, and that's good. And then, of course, as the AI count increases, it becomes harder to put them away usually. So like in bigger games or in obviously campaign missions where it's more than a 1v1, that will obviously help. So I do think that in general, you can get, like, there will be campaign content that will allow you to learn how to play the game and prepare you for, PvP, in a sense that, like, yeah, you're obviously going to be up against players who actually want to do things instead of like the AI being the way that it is. Like, it wants to beat you, but it's not very sophisticated in how it attempts it, and it doesn't adapt or anything. But you'll at least know how to play a game if you aren't being aggressively pressured forever or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's definitely going to be a step in the right direction, I think, for the way that we like target educating players and like onboarding them or whatever. It also, I think, you were talking about tilting. It's way more tilting to lose to another player than it is to lose to AI.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that'll be tilting to everybody because they're not used to losing to AI. But, that's
actually one of the things I talk about in the Apex video I'm working on. Not really tilting specifically, but the fact that every single person is competitive. Mm-hmm. And, modern game developers especially have been trying to reduce competitive as much as possible. They seem to be on some kind of like holy crusade, Deus Vult, against competitive gameplay. You have the participation award achievements that every game has to have now. You have everybody wins. There is no real losing. World of Warcraft, stuff like that. A lot of games just remove chat outright. And,
yeah.
The
it's
way
not
that
enough to have a fucking mute
button,
design, dude. The buck can't be on your court. You know what I mean? Like, the ball can't be on your side of the court as the person who has to deal with somebody else talking to them. Like,
yeah, there is a war against skill expression in games as well. Down to the way like itemization is done and stuff. You can just look at the way Blizzard made Heroes of the Storm, for example. There's just a lot of that. But people are competitive by design. They're going to be competitive even in these platforms, even as they try to take like a potato knife, scraping off things that they feel as skill expression and distance between players. Players are still going to seek competition. That's why even in Overweights, Overweight's like one of the most casual shooters ever created. It's just about as casual as that one Barney game where the game plays itself when you don't even do anything. That's Blizzard titles today. Still has a notoriously hateful, toxic community because it's still a shooter. The fact is that a lot of people crowded to it. They played it. It's PvP. They're competitive. They have a competitive spirit. Most people can't handle being competitive. That's going to be something that never changes, no matter how many padded walls and friendly colors and call arts and corporate bullshit you add on and shit. It's always going to be like that, and it's never going to change. And when I was talking in this video, I was talking about how skill expression is so important and facilitating skill expression is so important. And against the AI, you don't conventionally think of that because most games with AI, the AI is literally just there just to exist. It's there just to make something move around at the absolute maximum. Like you look at like Doom Eternal, for example, they have smart links and nav links for the AI to jump up ledges. You see it once or twice and then never again because the developers didn't give a fuck about the game at all. I mean, that's evident through the rest of that heaping pile of shit. But the AI in particular is really evident when they can't navigate the maps whatsoever. They can't go up ledges whatsoever. You can just stand on a car or something and they all just fucking sit there and stare at you. Like, that is the absolute best that you get out of most of these games. Is the AI may, like in Doom Eternal, it leads you through the walls. And you get hit by projectiles that don't make any sounds because their sound engineer apparently can't even fucking mix tracks together properly, according to Mick Gordon. And, like, there is never that thought behind making this actually a competitive, interesting, or difficult project. Now, if you had multiplayer in this, you would probably find people would treat that much more seriously. So and my competition, people, like, I had a whole analysis on this in one of my earlier discussions for that project where I was talking about reads, and I was basically like trying to like psychoanalyze one of my players who's now probably one of the top like 10 players in technical skill for DMC3 in the world. And of course he fucked up his hands though, so who knows how well that holds up today. But I basically tried to psychoanalyze the question of why did he do this for so long Why did he just play this for so long? Why is he stuck in this? Why does he prefer DMC3 over DMC4? And that's really a massive subject to get into in this. But the core, one of the core things I take away, and I talk about again in this video, is that people are competitive. And this has the interaction where the initial game is actually difficult for a new player. It was received negatively in the West because it was difficult for a new player. Ironic that Westerners would crowd to something like Dark Souls and Elden Ring because it's quote-unquote difficult. And issued DMC3 because it was too difficult. Same with DMC1. But you have the interaction where because somebody overcame something and then got good at it and was able to beat it, they're more compelled to return to it to continue to exercise power expression and the power fantasy because it took some effort to get to that point. And that's the single basic draw, the single basic monkey activated the almonds draw to competitive gaming is becoming better and overcoming challenges. And you don't see that with AI interactions because the AI has no challenge at all. And that's why people get salty in a PvP expression because it tells you weren't good enough. You weren't good enough in a game like, even like if Doom Eternal was well designed. If you have a difficult run and you start dying, you just say, oh, well, there's like 100 demons in the level and just one of me. I just got overwhelmed. Or, they have infinite ammo and I don't. Or, you can lay your blame of excuse on a million different things. But very few people will lay the blame on themselves exclusively and just say, oh, I fucked up. This is entirely a skill issue. How many times can you think of in so many of these like shooters, like say like, Counter-Strike or whatever, or TF2 is still a popular one today, where you get I think even some of those videos are posted in your server from people who have montages of their games in TF2, and they're just like accused of hacking endlessly. Like that's like the timeless one is you're hacking. You only beat me because you're I ran into that with PCM. Again, from one of those Star Wars games. I would shoot him with guns as he's jumping, and he would accuse me of hacking. It's like, dude, I'm just leading you. And, like, they can't come to terms that I had some innate skill of shooters at that point, and I was applying it to this game, which was not inherently really a shooter, and I was beating them with that. And they just couldn't come to terms with that. No, it's got to be your cheating. And you will come to that because now you are in the competitive spirit. It's the same thing with like buyer's remorse and stuff like that, as people are incapable of, accepting that they made bad purchasing decisions because that puts their, the authenticity of their decisions. It's not just about that they spent money and then it was a waste. It was about the decision behind they spent that money was a mistake. And then that questions their manhood, and they're no longer men if they accept that they made a bad decision and that they had the wrong call about something. And, I put a lot of money into shit I had a wrong call on in many respects. And I will fess up to that. Like, I spent money on World of Warcraft, and I had, memories and experiences of World of Warcraft, but a lot of it wasn't worth it. And yeah, you're going to find people get really salty about that. And you're going to find people, you have even just within the scope of a few weeks of watching CMBW and people playing it, we've already had someone join the server cry that their RTS Legacy and CNC wasn't enough to beat a dog or something. And then they just like anti-heroed immediately. And this was after like a wall of trivia about unrelated stuff. And it was like, okay, man, just like, I'm shit too. And I get salty sometimes, but I just keep playing. Like, I played against Shambler, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 times. I took, like, maybe 2 games off of him tops, maybe 3, and most of that was cheese. One was from getting him on tilt, and most of the games ended before I even got, like, 5 units. So it's like, I'm a cut. Like, that's just the way it goes. And, I have a lot of issues. Like, against Kian, I thought I should have won some of that, but it's like, no, you're struggling with the cursor and other stuff like that. Like, you have to deal with that. And it's just, like, you can get mad about it, but it's ultimately up to you to try to figure out how to come over these issues. And it's like, I'm not going to stop playing just because I'm losing. Like, to get as good as I was getting into StarCraft 2, where then I was at the top of my game for a long time, I had to go through the road of doing that constantly. And that was against Mucky. I played it and Brood War against Mucky many times. and he was the top player of that community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only time I ever actually beat him was when he went Terran and I was Protoss, and he did not build tanks. It was just Goliaths. That was the only time I was able to beat him, when he literally went the most inefficient way to fight against Protoss in that matchup period. So, and even then it was very difficult. So yes, it was a long road to get to that point, and you just get accustomed to that. And I think you're going to find a pushback to that today that's a lot stronger than it was back then, because people today have been told they can succeed without trying.
Sure.
And that's why the RTS genre is dead altogether. Is, people are trying to cater to that audience. Just look at fucking Shit Giant and all these other crappy companies from failed developers like Blizzard that are just like, RTS games aren't simple enough. We need to make them simpler to bring in the gacha crowd. And that hasn't worked yet, and it's not going to work, because at some point when you have an RTS, it's going to involve a person playing against another person, and most modern gamers, quote unquote gamers, can't actually handle that at all. They cannot handle that process at all. And I've even seen that within the extent of RTSs still, because that's the audience that's within this now.
Right.
And I mean, it's great to have AI only options, but when you start looking at PvP and stuff like this, you will probably be, I think, like CMBW, I think is in actually a really good spot to deal with this, because most of your players are older or otherwise like conditioned to deal with having trouble with shit. Like it really just seems to roll off of them. And that's good, because that's the best foundation you really could hope for, is some group of individuals who are at, fairly comparable skill levels. I think that you might start seeing gaps in skill levels as they become more accustomed to the actual project.
Yep.
But they're all otherwise still like fairly close to each other, at least from what I've seen so far. And they don't really care about losing. So I had not really like a lot of issues, but I have noticed, like, I tried to get people into viewing my videos. And they're like, but I have to download it and open it in the player, and it's too fucking hard.
Yep.
But now we go to playing CMBW with Shambler. I think we had to restart the game like 5-6 fucking times, re-download everything, because it just kept dropping right in the beginning of the match. And like, you're gonna have a hard time finding the average person, the average modern gamer, willing to download the project, much less sit through the desync issues.
Oh yeah, much less protect their PC from Windows Defender and turn off their firewall and install Radmin and get There's a lot of hoops to jump through. Even updating correctly is hard, right? So
sometimes I have issues where sometimes the files aren't fucking updated or something, or it's just the random desync. Like, you gotta like go back and read just to make sure, and like the map's not downloading or whatever. There's just a lot of shit, and it's like the modern gamer will never go through all that because it's too much work. They just want to fire it up on their phone and have everything handed to them and then instantly get their achievements. And if they can't get them, then they want a button that they can push that spends their money, and then the money gives them the achievements instead. That's the average day. A lot of the people I talk to right now, that like they like Elden Ring, it's too much work for them to watch a YouTube video on something. And then you got the other people where it's like it's too much work to download a video, and then they spend like $1,000 on a phone game to roll gacha. And like, that's your audience today. That's why Fagmon Studios does what they do, because that's the people that they're catering towards. And
yeah, don't worry. In Immortal, if you float more than like 1,500 resources, it just gets spent automatically. So
what?
I don't remember.
Isn't that the same game that like automatically closes as the match goes to an hour or something?
Yeah.
I don't know what they did to Unreal to fuck it up that badly that they had to do that, but it really says a lot about their fucking development. Holy shit. I probably have more units in Arbiter than they have in their game.
It's very possible. It's very,
because I can spawn, I tested this, I can spawn 60 Void Hounds running full IK, full Dragon IK for the heads, the legs, tail, well, their AI, none of really which is that optimized. And those are all skeletal meshes, which are historically bad for performance. And really, even with Lumen and everything active, the performance hit was just nothing. Like, you really, like, I mean, I tested like 200 units and it really wasn't much of an issue. And I'm sure there's a lot of corners you can cut in an RTS for this stuff because the performance cost is really going to come from the skeletal meshes. And yet these guys still keep aiming for the lowest of the barrel. And I mean, it's just like,
listen,
I don't know what the fuck their goal is. It's not to make an RTS.
yeah, I'll tell you this much. For a while now, DF has actually removed CCMU. We just haven't actually finished porting the code over. When that happens, and eventually we get him to. He said that he's probably going to attempt the selection limit at some point. Like, I won't hold him to that because obviously he's a busy guy. But if that happens too, like, just playing CMBW itself is going to be like you're going to hit some insane scale if the game, assuming the game continues the way that it's going, where it stabilizes and you can get to tier 3 as the player skill goes up and continues to be in parity. Like, you are going to get some seriously interesting and large scale fights, and that's within the confines of a fucking hacked together Brood War mod where you're reverse engineering and shit. And so, I'm pretty excited for that to be a continuous omen or portent of like sign of things to come, and it's really neat to see how that's progressing onward. And yeah, I mean, I guess that this is another question I should ask is, are you actually interested in doing more castovers in the future? Because I think you said you were, but like after doing the cast over the 2v2, and there was some feedback and some response to it, and it's doing as well numbers wise as any of the other videos I've uploaded. So I think people are interested in what other people's takes are, just like I'm interested. And so it was definitely enlightening to hear you sort of give your takes on the moment. You also approached it in a different way, right? You started off doing a little bit more of like, here's my sort of methodical breakdown of like what I think the map is going to indicate and like the players and the play styles and stuff. Is a very interesting way. Mine is more just like spur of the moment commentary, right? But yours is more like, maybe your analytical skills might be a little bit more focused on certain things.
Yeah, I was really debating a lot on how much I wanted to get into that because I realized, oh shit, if I start trying to actually cover this project in this and what it changes, I can be here like 2-3 hours, and that's just the extent of what I actually know.
Right.
My game knowledge, like I didn't know casters give mana when things do not die nearby, and that's kind of a really big thing to know. So I kind of like curbed that at that point. But yeah, like numbers don't make a difference to me. Like, I mean, I had YouTube videos with 50,000 views on my channel before I nuked it, but I still nuked it. Like, it don't really make a difference to me. But no, I'm fine casting more. It's, like I said, I'm not really looking to jump through hoops to get replays to work. I don't have to mess around with stuff because I really don't have the time to be experimenting. Because I don't really know what to look for if shit's going to be busted. And the last thing I want to do is go through like an hour of setup just to lose a recording.
Sure.
So that's really the big thing that I would be worried about. But no, I'm fine casting stuff. I can cast it at any time, in like a night or whatever. And I actually have a setup for that now. It should be a little faster for me to get that going. Then I had to do some fooling around because Game Capture didn't want to hook the window. But no, I can do that. I got everything set up to do it now. So I set that up for a reason. That's to do more of them. So whenever you want me to do more, just let me know. And I think the thing that I would ask is what extent people want me to get into technical analysis. Because while I obviously for like LPs and stuff like that, I have, some videos I like, even like Stray, I don't really go into a lot, but sometimes in some parts I can sit, in Doom Eternal, I sat in many of the starting locations for like an hour, taking apart every single fucking thing on screen because every single thing in that game is done wrong. And, I can do that too, not as an extent in the game replay because the game replay travels quite fast. But in terms of like analyzing the player abilities or whatever, there's obviously, I don't know the full extent of what you can do in the project. So a lot of what I say may or may not even apply half the time. But it's like, how much do you want me to get into really like hypotheticals? Like, what could you have done here? What should you have done here? Like, within the scope of my knowledge, I can do, a technical, or I can just do a play-by-play. I tend to mix the two. Play-by-play is probably a little harder for me to do nowadays, actually, because I'm not in practice for it. Maybe like look to my Warcraft 3 TGS videos for some of those, because they're longer, of course, and adds more time to it. But yeah, absolutely, I am definitely willing to do more.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, it's just the best, like the value add from somebody else's eyes who's obviously experienced as a commentator / caster, but also experienced as an RTS designer and a game designer in general, and also has experience like play like all the stuff that we talked about and covered in this, like the psychology of like 1v1s or like player versus player competitive actions, and we talked about the APM and the focus and the draining you can do and the tilting you can do, and you're starting to get more and more aware of what the project is and like how it works, and it's a way that like you've contributed to the cast just by playing the games, but now that you're demonstrating the ability to also do your own stuff in that sense, or like reminding people that, hey, actually Mesk does also do commentary. Did you know? That stuff is actually pretty interesting to look at. So I actually have a small package of replays here that I can probably send you for doing a series of or whatever.
Okay.
And
I could even do that today if you wanted. I'll be awake longer today. So
nice. Yeah. Well, there you go. People who are listening,
send me
will know
the stuff and I can set her up. I actually have to go AFK right now very quickly.
Sure.
I should be about 5 or 10 minutes, something like that, hopefully less.
We'll get back to it then. We are back and we have posted feet. Would you like to read that, Mesk?
And no, it's not a translation error. In my story, the meteor shower teleported a group of Terrans, and that's why they discovered that world. A light appeared in that meteor shower and teleported them. Recall effect with one F.
Mm-hmm.
But why?
That is the level of quality you can expect from none other than Started.net.
Oh, now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Even the spelling makes much more sense in that context.
All right, so we have returned. I guess before we move on to sort of recap and whatnot, is there anything in particular that you wanted to sort of finalize our conversation about CMBW and PvP stuff? Anything that comes to mind?
Not really. It's something I'm interested in seeing grow from this point. Time is ticking down for me here, and I have no idea if I'll be able to continue playing whenever the move shit happens. That's probably going to be in April. I don't see us getting out before then, and that's our deadline. Mm-hmm. But no, I will continue to put in more time into it and go from there. It is. I don't know how to describe, but I mean, like I said, it's the only other project other than my own I've ever really invested much time into. So it definitely holds my interest in that regard. I am certainly interested in seeing, like, I think the thing, like, beyond all the balance and player discussion, the thing that really kind of stands out to me that I would like to see changed or evolved on is obviously like the visuals and the audio and stuff like that, but particularly the graphics. Just modernizing them, getting in your own assets and stuff like that. I'm very interested to see that moving forward because it's quite clear that you've made some advancements in that time. The Atreus, for example, has been steadily cleaned up bits and pieces since it goes in. Once you go into creating like your own bullet projectiles and stuff like that, so they're all kind of synced up to each other, will be nice. I know you're holding out mostly for Antikythera to really get, all into that. But
well, most of my Blender, I've been doing a lot of Blender modeling from scratch as opposed to kit bashing, and all of that stuff has been for the new game as opposed to for CMBW. But we'll see when I have some time. Or
I'm still hoping one day I can conscript you.
Yeah, we'll see.
You got to reach the skill level where I can make use of that because I got a player character model and needs an axe taken to it.
Right. Yeah. The biggest issue is that like all the stuff I'm learning and putting to work is like it's like incomplete if it were tried to be put into a third person or first person game. It's like it's low poly, low resolution. It's like placeholder or whatever.
Well, it's like I already have assets to work with, so it's like I need someone who's familiar with the process,
right?
And can actually work with me because it's like, if I was to try to like let's say I had money, if I was to try to hire someone, you can't really get people on call with you to walk through stuff. So that's the kind of thing that's kind of interesting. Like it kind of like stood out to me when you guys were building this more actively. When we had like Balathol and the chat and stuff like this, is I don't know anybody else who does that, but that's how I would do stuff. If I had,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
If I had like a commission, like say I commissioned somebody to make me a model, I would prefer for them to be, streaming to me. Otherwise, I can watch them, talk to them in the process, because it's just that's really just how it should be.
Well, if you have
And
a vision to uphold, and there's
yeah,
like a director of the game or whatever you want to call it, it's like, yeah, that you you see this all the time, is that if somebody can't do the job themselves, but they still have an idea of what it needs to be, they are getting involved in the production of whatever the asset is that they need, right? And so, like, that is just how it should be. So yeah, when you're talking about when I was doing streams, or having Balethal stream Blender to me, and sort of walking him through what my thoughts were and what we needed, like, yeah, that's basically what happens behind the scenes when we're just on call with each other or whatever. So
it's also a learning experience, a very important learning experience. I imagine that had some role to play with your eventually getting into Blender, and it gave you some idea of what to work with and what the workflow might look like with your process.
Yep.
Now you're into it. It's a starting point. It's very important. I think that a developer should always know every single thing that goes into his project, maybe not intimately, right? But enough that, he knows if there's a problem with something, he knows the general process to addressing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to a parts of it being a black box.
Yeah, and just having no real understanding of certain aspects of it. I mean, it's kind of like that with some of the programming that goes into this, where like I would be totally lost. It would take me at least maybe a solid few weeks to reverse engineer the current state of Antikythera myself, to like walk through and understand all the code. And maybe then some of the deeper, lower level concepts of the programming might not make sense to me because I'm not aware of that stuff. Yeah. And then I might, that lack of knowledge or that ambiguity might result in me making improper changes if I were to try to take up the mantle of programming it all myself, right? So that could definitely be like one example. But, as far as the art goes, I like to have at least a cursory understanding of what other people are doing if they're going to be involved in the project, and also love to be able to see like the process of that being put together, especially when it comes to like visual art stuff. Just because that helps me have like realistic expectations of the people who are contributing, so that I don't like give them too much or perhaps too little in some cases, where it's like, actually this is like a 30-minute job, and I'm just giving you like, oh yeah, I get this to me by a week from now or something. So like, it just, it makes everything work a lot smoother if you at least know sort of what the process is, and also sort of what the limitations of the things are. Like, as I've gotten more familiar with programming, I've been able to make more like, basically before there was like a pitch of an idea for an ability or something, and then Vic would have to like try to implement that, but then explain why it can't be implemented properly or like all the way because of some limitation. Might be brood war, might be just programming like the laws of physics or whatever, because it's like, oh, you can't do that or it'll slow the game down too much. And then as I get more of an innate understanding of what's possible on a programmatic level, I can work that into the design, so we short circuit a lot of those issues and we get it done a lot faster. So it does end up being a lot more efficient. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird to hear you say that, like, you don't really think too many people do that. But I also intuitively understand that, yeah, a lot of people don't do that. They just sort of like offload it, or
people just kind of like every project I've ever dealt with has just been like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, that's not possible. And they're like, oh, and then the fucking trail of thought ends there. Like, that's what it was with StarCraft stuff, is like, can you design all these crazy abilities and stuff? And I'm like, I don't know how to reverse engineer the entire game. I'm sorry. We're talking stuff that's like, I think similar in complexity, like how the Anseal's shield works. Like there was no even the slightest precedent for something nearly that complicated in StarCraft all the way up until you did it. And nobody ever had that kind of skill to implement custom spells and stuff into StarCraft. And, people just ask me like Sons of War was a bad one. It was like they wrote out all this stuff with zero game knowledge whatsoever. And I was like, I'll help you with your project. And they just hand me this wall of stuff. I was like, can you just do all this? And I'm like, you can't do any of this. None of this is possible. And, then like StarCraft 2 stuff as well, like, Carbot. Absolutely no engagement with really anybody. Sometimes played some multiplayer stuff with them. But zero engagement with the project whatsoever. Went through a middleman. The middleman, zero in real, he talked to us. But there was like serious lack of understanding from everybody. It was only like me and HKS were just kind of like on our own little island trying to make stuff work, and we were looking at the rest of the content that they had that project that fuck was his name? It was the kid C something, don't remember. forgettable. All of his stuff was a fucking mess. Didn't know what a root bone was. Had to root
Okay.
out in the fucking abyss anywhere. It all had to be completely redone. HKS had to redo all of his work. That was shit that they had paid for, by the way. It was done incredibly incompetently. And it was like nobody understood any part of what the other parts of the body were doing. That's one of the reasons why commercial developers, they can't make good games, is because no parts of the body are ever talking to each other, except in commercial companies it's subdivided to an absolute absurdity where you have individual assets being worked on by like 10 different people that don't really talk to each other. And it's just like somebody has something to you, can you texture this? And it's like, he may not even be really intimately aware of how the fucking UVs are done. They may be different than how he's done. And just, you might have like individuals talking to each other, but it is absolutely not corporate structure to have, intercommunication because they're so fucking large at that point. Yeah. It's not even possible anymore. And you have like designer Dave and Pardo and Schaefer and stuff like that saying that nobody talked or tried to improve stuff or anything. So it's only gotten worse since then as the products entail. And then you have, again, the Mecha Garden stuff as well, which, again, if any shred of that is true, it's entirely believable because that is just how incompetent these companies really are.
Well, the other thing, too, is, by the way, I'm pretty sure, and unfortunately I am mentally ill enough to still have this information in my head, you're probably referring to Caverain, or however you pronounce that.
Yes, Caverain, that's him, yes.
Yeah, so there you go.
I still remember Vindicare was like, oh, this guy is so talented. And we looked at his models and the root bones and everything being all over the place and the materials not being set up properly most of the time. And it's just like, this guy is obviously just your average kid trying to make models and there's nothing special and it's all a huge disaster. And we have to redo every single thing he's done anyway. So he and Oracle were really just like two peas in a pod, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's important to understand, at least to start to try to build an understanding of whatever it is you're trying to actually make. Because you can have all these ambitious ideas. And it sort of takes us back to the beginning when I said Cosmonic Brood War is the most ambitious project to see play in StarCraft. And it's like, maybe there were, I'm undoubtedly sure that there were some concepts that some people had as vague or whatever as they may have been that like would have put the concept of what CMBW is to shame, but they never got off the ground. They never even got made. And
Armageddon Onslaught, for example, is obviously no real ASM in that because I wanted to have ASM. I mean, I had Poi Quirk trying to do stuff like expanding iScript bin and stuff like that.
Right.
That would have been absolutely massive and would have helped you guys to this day. But obviously that stuff didn't work out. And most is like, I'd say probably like 70-80% of the things I tried to do were just regarded to be impossible. That I think CMBW can basically do almost all of them now, like changing projectile speeds mid-flight and stuff like that. Yeah, that wasn't possible before.
I mean, you can kind of sort of do it by default just by giving it like a weird acceleration value, but
yeah,
like if you wanted to slow it down after,
because I was going to have projectiles that like spawned in the air, and then moved. I cheated around that. But then there was one that would actually, like, it would have random speeds. Every projectile is going to travel at a different speed than each other. And that wasn't really going to be doable back then. And there was a lot of stuff I did do at the time. It was absolutely massive. But CMBW is like the modern equivalent of Armageddon Onslaught on the technical level. And now it is... You don't see this kind of work in any game at all. There's only, like, Diablo 2. I know one person in Diablo 2 who is doing bigger than this. And that's it. That's the only example I have across the dozens of games I've worked with of people getting into real reverse engineering. You had one guy in Age of Wonders 2 that did some kind of EXE hacks. I don't know the full extent of it, but I think it was mostly changing individual values here and there. It was after that time I stopped working with that. I don't think it could have fixed any of the issues I had with my project in that game. Warcraft 3 had nobody, and StarCraft 2 has nobody, and like Blizzard's community has been dead since like 2002. There hasn't really been people trying to make exceptional projects in that game for a long time. And other like reverse engineering in general is really not something that modders get into, because most people who are modders because they don't got any skills. Like pretty much everybody with StarCraft 2 who got into custom content with that, they have no skills. Period. Like you have people like Delphinium who are like entry level 3D, and they kind of like stood head and shoulders above the rest because nobody else does any 3D stuff. Because chances are, if people have skills, they're not going to relegate themselves to working in shitty engines. They have some experience in actual custom content creations, either developing assets or designing, and they know what to look for, and they have actual standards to adhere to when it comes to building something in a project. So that's why these people go even to like Unity or something like that is still an infinitely better choice than making a mod. So yeah, CMBW is far and beyond the most ambitious project I know of in the public sphere at this point in time. The Diablo 2 project I am aware of is significantly larger and significantly more involved and a lot longer lived, but I can't really talk too much about that one, unfortunately. It is still like to me, they're kind of like in similar veins in some respects. They stand out to me, and they stand out to me for the reason that there is just nothing else like them at all. Like, I really was the only person in really the entire Blizzard community from a period after I joined, I'd say around like 2003, all the way up until you guys, that had serious ambitions. Nobody in StarCraft 2 had any ambitions at all. Like, the closest you really get is the stuff that like Pirate was doing. And then Turtles and his AI concepts and triggers. Those are like little isolated islands. They're not real full-fledged projects. They aren't touching the graphics. Nobody did any audio. People just don't have the ambition to really like try to harness the skills or whatever to make stuff. You know, the idea of ambition for StarCraft 2 is like Antioch Chronicles 3 and StarCraft's. It's like StarCraft's is, in a sense, a conversion. In a sense. But it doesn't even change the game, right? Like, it's not even a real conversion. It's just a reskin. And that's like the most sophisticated thing that you will ever see in that game at all. And it is absolutely pitiful. That's why, you know, a lot of problems with these old StarCraft projects, like, you know, Legacy of the Confederation and Gallantry and all this other shit. But they had custom voice acting, custom assets, custom maps. Some of them even had custom AI. Who the fuck does that in StarCraft 2? The top talking heads at SE2 Mapster continually told me you can't even have modded AI in this game. You can't mod the melee AI. I had to show them that this is just basic shit. That you just fucking put them in and replace them in the folder structure like you have since 20 fucking plus years ago.
Yep. Yeah. Well, they weren't around 20 plus years ago. They're all Johnny come latelys, right? So
yeah, honestly, I was insulted. And it was like some people were good people. They were just had their heads so far up their asses, or they just were completely and totally soulless. I don't know. And that just rolls right into what I was saying before, that you kind of have a hard time expanding your player base because the kind of people being drawn into the sphere are people who have no aspirations. And that's the people who are afraid of being competitive. And in a sense, modding is being competitive. Game design is being like actual game design, not Reddit game design. Actual game design is being competitive because it's about self-improvement. It's about learning skills. It's about overcoming challenges. It's about making something that can be better than something else, which is your previous ideas. And that's being competitive with yourself. You can almost think of it from an Islamic state of view, and that you're always wearing a jihad against yourself. And that's kind of what content creation is like, because it's problem solving. And that's why you got a lot of people who think they can do it. They try to get into mods, and their retention rate is like 1 out of 100, easily, if even, because people can't handle the whole self-improvement aspect. They think that they're just going to walk in and watch tutorials and something kind of a fucking game. And even if it's something brain dead simple like making shit in StarCraft, it's still a time investment most people aren't capable of handling because they don't really have ambition. They don't really have aspirations. They have some meme idea they thought would be neat, and they spring off of that, and it drops to the hat, and they wonder why they can't make anything. It's because it's not something they truly believe in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Over and over and over and over, regardless of the medium. I've seen them so many times.
It's just one of those things that is kind of a shame, because you would think that if more people actually try, sort of the same way that, funnily enough, in that when I was talking about how if you're trying to like limit test or understand parts of the game, and then, you know, you're like, oh, I guess I'll have to be, you know, I guess the game is over. Let me just GG. But actually, if you like play for a little bit longer, you get more sample size, you get maybe more information, you can at least play more competitively when it gets to that point next game. It's like these people don't ever get to that point in their content creation phase that they when I released my shitty campaign in Consummate, I at least understood then at the end I had sample size of finishing a project and releasing it, and then I also had sample size of like doing that weird release schedule where I release like half of it first and then the other half like drip feed, and that's like, okay, well, this is not actually really that good for this kind of project. It's actually pretty bad and not something that I want to repeat for a single player experience. So in the future, I'll just release it all at once. And that was sort of that was one of the things that I was able to take away from that. And like, if I didn't do the first bad thing that wasn't as good, or maybe was ambitious but like fell short of the expectations, great. Like, now I have information. Now I can do better next time. But if you never do that for whatever reason, then you never even have a chance to push the envelope. So these people who maybe you're saying like a lot of people don't really have ambitions, but I wonder if they would develop them by actually trying to do something, or at least explore doing something, even if it doesn't get into a released project.
It's like a lot of people I talked to, even like 20 years ago, that would have like little pet projects, and I would still encourage them to develop for them, because you may not get somewhere with this project, and maybe you won't even get somewhere that you find content with it. But it can help you discover what you really want to do, because that's a really hard question to answer, is what do you really want to do? And that's a question I've been asking myself for over 20 years. For the longest time, I thought I was making RTS projects. And, even to this day, again, I figure if I had, a stable environment and patched up, learned a little bit more about 3D skills, I could have made... And I could still make an RTS campaign that would completely change the shape of any expectations from anybody ever had RTS campaigns that would actually play it. Because Apex's design has been proven to work, and everything I've ever pushed it to and tested. And I know what I could do given that opportunity. But I think the reasons why I really stopped short of really getting into actuation beyond R&D was it wasn't something I really genuinely cared about. And it took me a long time because I thought that this was something I cared about. And that's why Apex went through so many iterations, is because I thought this was something I wanted. But those iterations took me to writing those scripts for Apex C and Apex F for the ARPG concepts. Never actually tried to make them because I was too scared. I was too scared of Unreal Script. I was too scared of programming and stuff like that. And it took an unrelated event, which was Snowball, to push me into actually braving that. And now, a little over 3 years after that day, that I decided to just say, fuck it, we're doing this. I'm still working on it despite everything, all the insane shit that has happened. And I still don't know, is this what I really want to do? But I'm going to keep going because I know that I'm on the path to finding out what I really want. And that is a path that has taken my whole fucking life to find. And it has been worth it. Because now that I feel that I'm getting on that path, I've been able to do that through the hardest shit in all my life by so much, where no way with anything else I was doing at any point could I have endured this. So many times, so many things would happen, and it kills my project so often. And now my project has endured through all this insanity, and it's because I feel like I'm on that path to finding what I really want. And before I die, I want to know what I want. And so many people I talk to, including myself for all my years, will give up and not look for that, and not look or be able to even attempt to ask what it is they really want, when they showed skills far exceeding my own, like Dark Omen and music composition and stuff like that, or people in 3D graphics or whatever, shit I could never dream of doing, and they were a fraction of my age, and they bounce off of that, and it's like, man, you were here and you acquired all this skill, and you weren't happy with what you were making, because most often you were making fan material. You weren't making something original. It could never be yours.
Right.
It could never be your thing. It could never be your aspiration. You are writing some other thing, but they didn't take that hint, and then they disappear, and then it's like a window, and sometimes people just got to move on from something and leave something behind. I left behind music composition and stuff like that, but that's because I had no skills, and given the chance, I would try again for sure.
Well, I definitely think that there's something to be said about daunting tasks that just feel like they're out of your wheelhouse entirely. I mean, you manually weight painted a bunch of shit to try to fix your player character, and that's stuff that like you probably had no confidence in your abilities to do, right? And it's not finished, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think that if we just avoid things that intimidate us, then at some point that is like it's like a different kind of death because you're just allowing it to defeat you, and in that psychological way almost. And so I like to think about it like I've given this analogy before. There's like a folder. There's two folders on your desktop, and one of them is like a bunch of shit you can't do, and a bunch of shit you can do is in the other one. And you just want to drag stuff from the can't do to can do every now and then. Like if you can do that, assuming the things that you can't do are actually going to be useful to whatever you're trying to work on. And again, that involves like making sure you understand your goals, like you were saying about Apex in StarCraft 2 versus Apex in Unreal. It's like, yeah, you can go somewhere with that. Like if you just keep slowly but surely chipping away at the folder number 2, getting things into the good one, then eventually that, your project, your pipeline, I guess, your process becomes a lot more robust, able to take on a lot more different kinds of work and, finish things up. And, you mentioned for CMBW, it's like, yeah, we haven't really lingered too much on the visual side of the game, like especially with regards to new projectiles. And there's obviously some reads, like I observed a few cast overs ago, that like the Madrigal is now seeing a lot more play. People are starting to wake up to how powerful it can be, but it has no read, not even an audio read for when it's actually switching modes, and you just have to find out when it attacks. And so that is definitely a case where like that would be very useful to have as some sort of visual indicator that like, even if it's just an overlay that if it by its absence, that it's in, a certain mode, as opposed to when you see it, it's on the other mode. Like that in and of itself is fine. And that can kind of carry a decent amount of weight by itself. And then at least then you'd be able to understand some aspects, right? So like there's an element of the reads that their absence means it's actually quite hard to understand the game on an intuitive sense. And then there's obviously the angle of like, well, it just doesn't look very good in some cases. Like animations for some custom stuff definitely need to be tightened up so there's no feet sliding. And then on top of that, we also have all the stuff that just needs custom graphics in the first place. And so as we get better at doing that, as I specifically continue to go down the Blender rabbit hole and build stuff for our first game, I'm sure there's going to be a trickle down effect where I end up like, let me just try to fix up this asset, or let me just try to make a new one for this thing or whatever. And that will, it's a lot easier to do it for CMBW anyway, because like the scale of the assets is actually smaller in general than what we're doing. I don't know if I've commented on this before in this podcast, but our first game is going to have like the scale of a worker is similar to the scale of a siege tank in Brood War, where in terms of size of the asset itself.
You may as well have them higher resolution.
Right. So as a result of that, the bigger asset, ratio or whatever the size ratio, like even something that's the size of a Zergling in Brood War is probably going to be, I don't know, the size of 1.5 Marines or something. I don't even know. I guess maybe a regular worker. Like it's going to be bigger than that. So as a result of that, it's like our scale is going up in terms of the asset size because we have more screen space, and
rendering changes a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's totally different.
Yeah. So in that context, it's definitely like a case where, I actually have to put in less effort to make it look visually appealing in CMBW because I don't have to have as many details. It's actually bad if I have more details, as StarCraft Remastered showed. So yeah. So yeah, I think that's going to be, eventually there will be improvements to there. It's just going to be a little bit more slow going. But, something else that's kind of weird is that, obviously we're cognizant of like trying to get funding for stuff. And I'm not preparing myself for this eventuality, but assuming if we were to not get funding again this time, because by the end of February, we're going to see if we can get, pitched to IndieFund. Yeah. If we don't get the funding, and maybe we can still just work on CMBW for a little bit longer anyway. And we have this coffee page thing going, and it's just like, it's the way that it's set up is that you're mostly just like padding our our money in the event of an emergency or something, but there is no emergency now. Like we'll still continue doing what we're doing. Maybe we just work a little bit slower than before. Like that's what the video sort of explained. And, if that ends up, if we are able to like really go through the rigmarole of like all the things that you would need to do to make the experience somewhat competitive. Like you think about all the things that we don't have yet. We don't have an automatic updater to like, maybe reduce some of the issues that people have with like actually setting up the game and then playing the game. We don't have, something that like protects against the desyncs that we do have. And there's still a little bit of instability here and there. And we don't have, I don't know that we would ever bother implementing a ladder or something, but I guess I could probably try to partner up with the Shield Battery guys who are over in Remastered. We might be able to make something happen there. We don't have super robust replays, like sometimes they break and all this stuff, right? And so if we could actually fix all of that and also go through actually see what it's like to build a competitive game, because our first game isn't really going to have, it's not going to have server-based matchmaking for sure. It's not going to have anything like that because we're not going to bother picking those up. Like there's a potential here where we are able to graduate into, like at least we have some experience doing it in this case where, I mean, like it or not, and maybe this is a cynical take or something, but like for a mod that is like, I mean, now there's a little bit of money changing hands, so expectations are obviously going to be different. But there is a case where you can make the case that, hey, this mod is just there as like a community project, and so if something doesn't work, like it's kind of expected. But if we build our own engine and our own game, then we naturally have to adhere to a higher standard personally and also in the eyes of the player base. So maybe this can be a good learning opportunity anyway, and it's just sort of like right now we're just trying to meet a deadline for the end of February to get a pitch out. But beyond that, there's if it doesn't work out or whatever, then, you can probably expect us to really try to polish this up to be a bit more like what we would like it to be. And we'll just have to sort of see how that plays out. But it's definitely something I've thought a lot about. I guess we haven't done a Big Boys Table since before the coffee episode. So I guess, when we started opening up that page for crowdfunding or community funding or whatever. So I actually didn't really get a chance to get a litmus test or a temperature check on like how that has gone over, but I don't know if you really had any opinions on it in particular.
I mean, you're trying to find indie development, so for me it's kind of just whatever. Obviously I've always refused donations all the way up until I needed it for medical bills for the cats. And it reached a point where like you paid for half of Smokey's earn and Schwa the other half, I think. And Schwa has tried to help me out throughout time, and it's always been well appreciated. And but the flow of money was never enormous, but it tapered off massively after last year. And actually, it more or less tapered off massively before 2020. Actually, I used to have someone he was quite well off, and he helped me out actually quite a bit during the late I'm trying to remember the time. It was some years ago now, but it was like during like the melting ulcer and stuff like that. There was times where the medical bills were way too much for me to deal with, and he helped me out, and it was absolutely life changing, honestly. And that's the point where I had to accept that, like, I don't like to receive money from people. I don't like to have money involved with anything I do. But this is somebody who I don't know, who's just like a viewer of my videos that is offering me money. And it's like, this is life-changing money. I need it to save my cat's life. Like, I can't not accept this. And it's like, I have to accept it. And it's like, in some respects, you might view it as like you have to go back on your, the way you've lived for so long, where I've had a lot of offers for money throughout the years, and I've always turned them all down. And a lot of job offers too, and I've turned those down, but those are kind of different. And, but it's also the same, like, it changed the way I viewed donations in general, where the main thing that like, I've had this conversation actually a couple of times with different people, with HES in particular, where I have always been completely and vehemently opposed to mods asking for money for any shape or fashion.
Right.
I always have felt, and I've always seen evidence that once mods start involving money into their project, the quality drops because it changes. Like, it takes a special kind of person to be able to handle the responsibility of getting money in exchange for something that is a hobby that you legitimately did not put that much effort into because it's a mod. You didn't make the game engine, you didn't make the assets, And then once once we hit the point of like Nexus, where you're like actively encouraged to beg for Patreon pay pigs, and it's like that's the first thing you see on 90% of the project pages. It's like, yeah, this is no excuse why your projects are all so fucking broken, but they are always so fucking broken. And then you've got all the shit about compatibility like there's just it's just most people just can't handle it. And it would be best just to never have money involved in that at all, because then you're only going to draw people who are passionate about it. Like with StarCraft 2, one of the reasons why StarCraft 2 is a fucking graveyard is because the promise for the marketplace brought all these people who are in it just for the fucking money.
Yep.
And it just like it changed the whole intent versus people who like, again, you can say a lot about the quality of the projects in the early CC, but these were people who were not getting compensated, who did at the time put in a lot of effort to build stuff, to figure out like custom portraits and rendering and voice acting and stuff like that. And you don't see those anymore today with people who are getting fucking compensated for it. Like the whole thing just doesn't, it's not a circle that drives people who have real ambition or aspiration to make a high quality project.
Oh yeah, there's like an instant way where you could imagine if we were to specifically say, hey, pay us money so that because we made CMBW, right? It's like then
or pay us money to update CMBW.
Okay, sure,
like, that's the real evil of it.
That would be even more germane to my point too, because I was going to say like I've seen before that like when we started on the path of like segmenting out the tech and making it more expensive, some people preferred the older method where you could just bum rush like any old tech and the pacing was out of whack because they like whatever, they personally thought that was better. Obviously it was like it's changed massively since then, it's become healthier anyway, but like there were people who maybe didn't agree with the direction, and if those people happen to be the people giving me money, that would be an instant conflict of interest where it's like, yep, I think the game will be better this way, but it will actually financially cost me to do that. That is something that you have to like you basically have to not be beholden to the cash, and it has to just be this nice extra thing. And like most people aren't going to treat it that way, right? They are just going to be like, hey, what do you guys want? And become Frost Giant Studios basically like design my game for me. Like, no, that's just not how we approach it. So I think that's our ace in the hole in that front is like, it's expressly not for like anything in particular. Like it's going to allow us to, you know, maybe take more time away from our real life work that we currently use to pay the bills, but we're doing the same things that we're always going to do. Like the design philosophy doesn't change just because you gave us money. Like the best I can offer you is like, I'll make you a birthday map or some shit, you know, like there's an element there where it's like, really, you're going to take time away from that. But I would probably do that anyway. Like I've been doing birthday maps for like fucking 5 years now or something. So yeah, it's not like a huge change in that respect anyway. But you know, beyond that, you know, it's a way for me to show my appreciation for the financial support. And then it's also just like not a worry that I mean, like everybody who's so far paid enough money to do that anyway has just basically said, "Nah, make more melee maps instead." So it's not even like something that's actually been made yet. So I don't know. That's funny to me, but yeah.
Well, it's like it's kind of like the way I began to see it at that point is like because I did a lot of reading about this because that was the time I had donations available for a short time, and I was concerned about the legality of that because. Donation laws are actually really strict, and I did a lot of reading about it, and it's basically you cannot compensate people for donations whatsoever. So that kind of just reinforced the way I began to see it, which is people who give me money for content they already enjoy it.
Right.
And I can't offer them, and I didn't want to offer anything in exchange, right? So that's the time there was like that's how I could view it in a neutral way where it's like, I am a nonprofit. I have always been, and I always will be a nonprofit. But, you know, people wanted to give me money because they enjoyed my video projects. And it's like, I no longer could say I don't want your money because I couldn't provide for my cats. And it's like, there is a time where you have to swallow your pride and just accept it.
Yeah.
And that is what I did. And, you know, I took that down after I didn't really need it anymore. And I mean, the whole site's fucking dead now. But it was like, you know, if people want to give me money today, it's like, I have money right now because the cats are fucking dead. And the money that went to their medical bills is, I can cash it now and just hang on to it. And it's not a lot, but it's like, you know, there is no one in the world who can give me enough money to make an actual difference in my life because I would need like millions of dollars. And, you know, it's like I'm impartial to the whole thing as a result of all the stuff that has happened where it's like take D&D, for example. D&D is a very targeted medium that I spent, like, take Autumn Wind, was about 2.5 years of work.
Right.
And that is man hours of tremendous amounts. Like, I'm close to finishing the video series for this finally, and it's like most of the time I'm fucking just blown out of my mind. I'm dead tired, and it's like I just gotta force myself to keep going on through all the shit that's happening in my life, hammering, smashing day by day, night by night, constantly. And I cannot afford to slow down. It's like the only thing I want out of people is feedback, right? That's all I care about. I never want money for this. And yet you see in the background this resurgence of people. Like, I think the greatest enemy of people getting money involved in this is not just the people that beg for money to do stuff, because you have people basically saying they're going to sell DMing services, and I guarantee you they don't put a shred of effort into it that I do, and they're probably worse DMs in general, even though I'm not that good. But then you get people who are actually asking for this. That's the real evil of it.
Yes,
It's
it
like
normalizes
people who
it to
buy
the point where
games.
people start thinking, "Oh, I can't do that. I'll just pay somebody to do it."
Yeah, no, well, they want to pay someone. Like, they think it's acceptable and they think it's okay, and they start asking for it. Like, you got people who play Final Fantasy 14 that ask Square to put stuff in the cash shop for a game they already pay monthly for. Like,
yeah, and there's already not
see
that
this
much
everywhere.
content, right? So it's like, bro, what are you doing?
you see that with like Stormgate and shit. People are trying to normalize the free to play meme.
No, they,
Like,
they go a
asking
step
for
further and they're
skins
like,
and
I've
cash out.
already started drafting game ideas that I will make inside Stormgate when it launches. Please let me know please confirm that there will be monetized custom content. Or,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and that's the real evil, because that's the kind of mindset you open up by doing this. But in your case, it's like you're trying to find an indie game development. So it's just basically like I would say like a non-shitty version of Scam Starter, because what I hate is fucking Kickstarter and shit like that in general, because there's no obligation that anybody really has to do anything. They can just take your money and run with it, and that always happens. And those sites in general are really, really shitty, scummy websites. And it is, it's not my place to say that you shouldn't take money because you do X or Y. But the thing is that you guys are actually attempting to learn new skills, to build something from scratch and all this other shit. You got to get money for building an independent project somewhere if you're trying to take time off of your jobs and trying to make this. And if people really want you to make this and they're willing to invest in helping you build that foundation, then, that's completely different. So, it's you do what you do. Like, right now I'm looking at a situation where I could be actually literally completely fucked. And I could be fucked to the point I might actually have to try to survive on my own. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. And I might have to start an OnlyFans account. So we might have to revisit this fucking conversation in a few months.
Okay. That'll be that's a teaser.
Alive.
Yeah, that's a teaser for the future podcast.
This shit could get real. Like, shit's just really teetering on the edge of absolute fucking complete barrel bottom insanity now.
Well, you know what you were saying earlier is that you had to swallow your pride, and I'm reading the Dune book series, and in the second book, which people have mostly said is terrible, but I'm not minding it so far. The second book has a quote in it that is something along the lines of, when a man becomes what he is, when he's spent all this time solidifying and calcifying into something, he would rather die than become the opposite of what he is. And I feel like there is that temptation of like, I've said no microtransactions, no money, no this, no that, and like try to be super ethical or whatever. And I don't even think that the current funding thing that we have is not ethical. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But like, there's an element to that where it's like, yeah, would you really though rather die? And like, you're actually going to have to do, like you were saying, we might have to revisit this in a few months. Like, that could be the choice that you make. And I think, it's just a question of like, how, like, do you want to be so ossified in a certain, like, what are you willing to die for is like one of the questions that you have to ask yourself. And it sounds weird to say in the context of fucking crowdfunding or whatever, but it's like, at that point it's like, yeah, I think the world, in some ways, like, one thing that I actually do, and maybe this is copium beyond belief, and I'm just like super inflated of my ego or something, is I actually do worry. Like, I don't think I'm not delusional enough to think I'll affect change in a very long run across an entire amount of people or whatever. And like, in a cosmic scale, maybe all of humanity is nothing anyway. But to the extent that I can have an impact, and like to the extent that like I can improve people's conceptions of what a game can do and what RTS games especially can do, I do worry that like if I were to have a health problem, fall ill and die, like obviously there's all the worries of like my family and my friends and the community that I've built and yada yada, but there's also like what happens if nobody else fucking does anything in this field? Like what happens if, like I would feel like my work was incomplete. And I do think in that situation it's like, yeah, I mean, not to any means necessary, not Machiavellianly, but in a sense that if it involves like, if it involves certain, like there's certain things I would actually do, like, ask for, like build up a Kickstarter or whatever. And I would try to do them ethically. But if it came to that, and if like that was the difference between making something and not making something, right? So a different scale than dying or not dying, obviously. Then like, yeah, there's certain things that I would consider that maybe before I've come out and said, yeah, there's no way I would consider that because, well, so spoiler, as you get older, things change and you get more experience, you figure out more things. But also like reality will set in. Like I'm going to be 29 this year in 2023, towards the end of it. I think. I can't remember how old I am actually, but I'm pretty sure that's my age. And then, pretty soon I'll be 30. And like, that's people usually have like a crisis of like, oh shit, I'm 30 years old now. And I have done X, Y, and Z, or I haven't done X, Y, and Z. And it's like, yeah, well, like someday odds are we're not going to invent fucking super life extending technologies or become AI or whatever. So assuming we actually do pass on at some point, like there's going to be some things you didn't get done. So yeah, I would like that list to be as small as possible. And, if I'm continuously spending 3 or 4 days a week doing shit that I don't want to do just so that I can have some money, then that decreases the amount of time that I can spend making that list of things I didn't do as small as possible. So yeah, I don't know. That's a lot of shit to throw at the very end of the episode because we are coming up on time here. But if you have any other thoughts on it or whatever, any response, feel free to make it known.
Well, for a lot of people, I think it is like quality of life is they get like the taste of that fucking pay pig money that really generally just requires them to do nothing. Then they become addicted to getting money from nothing because, that's just going to happen. And, then they don't want to break that. And then they're not going to break that. And then you just get like the fucking tugboat situations. And
that's something else that I brought up and preempted in the video is that like, there's a outside chance that we might, or like there's people might think that we're going to get money for doing nothing or whatever, or like care more about the money than the work. And it's like, if anything, like you said, people get addicted to getting money for doing nothing. I'm addicted to actually working. Like that's the opposite, bro. Like I'm working with no money. So yeah, I feel like, I mean, I can't, again, you change and things happen, but like from where I'm standing right now, I just can't imagine like taking money to passively do nothing and sit there and like not, even within the context of working within a mod instead of my own game and engine, I'm still like reinventing shit and like getting us to the point that we're at now. And that's not going to happen if you're just not going to do work. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem for the average person, I guess.
It's like for me, like quality of life is important.
Yeah.
Like money doesn't really have any value to me. Again, I'm never going to have enough money to make an actual difference. But for me, quality of life is really important. And my quality of life is already like it's pretty much intolerable at this point. I'm not willing to deal with an environment with more noise, more chaos, more instability, more claustrophobia, more people. I'm not really willing to deal with that stuff. So, I'm nearly, I don't even remember my own age. I'm going to be quite frank with you. It's either 36 or 37 soon. And like, I don't even keep track of that stuff because it means so little to me. And it's like, my health is just sharply dropping. My mental health is sharply dropping. The stress has just aged me like fucking wildfire. It has just destroyed me. And physically speaking, with all the broken toes and my knees and everything in my back, I can't expect any physical capability out of myself really at all anymore. I have to use a cane most of the time, and going up the stairs is always a hassle. And it's like some days I just can't walk. My knees are just too fucked, and that's from the move before. And you gotta face facts that this move is probably going to be the real straw that just shatters the camel's back for innumerable like we're really depending on miracles here, like because like no matter where I could end up, it's gonna be worse. And I mentally I just can't handle it. I can't handle worse at this point. And it's like then there's like a lot of other biological clocks that are coming up here that are getting hit fucking hard, and they're just gonna put a bullet in the head of anything that stands after that. And it's like when you're talking about like, oh, I want to do all this stuff. Or for me, I've already given up on most of the stuff I wanted to do because I know it's not within my mental capability to do. Like, I'm not going to make that RTS campaign. I'm not going to get to the list of LPs I wanted to do. I'm not even going to get to the castovers I wanted to do. I think it'll be a miracle if I get this fucking on and win castover shit done before, whatever happens. I'm close to the end, but, shit happens and days disappear, and that's that. And I had all these hardware problems just a couple of days ago, and the system wouldn't even start. And I thought, oh fuck, I've blown out the system. Now I'm really, 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 really fucked.
Oh yeah.
But it was really just the RAM misbehaving again. It was just behaving in an absolutely insane way. There's the drive issues that cropped up that could have spelled just disaster of unsalvageable proportions. And it's like shit happens and life happens, and you just kind of like abandon all these things going on, and it's just like I do think that a lot of people are not willing to die for what they believe in, that they will fold and they will keep folding and they'll keep folding. And I mean, that is how like the government control works. That's how propaganda works, is you got to chisel people down bit by bit as opposed to be imperceptible. But me, no, it's like I've given enough ground to insanity at this point, and I'm really not willing to give up more. And all options at this point look like they're just gonna just destroy that. And if I live through it, I'm not going to be the same person. It's going to be a disaster. Like, I'm not the same person I was before my cats died. Watching them die changed me in ways I can't even put into words. It took a lot. It destroyed me. And I no longer feel human anymore. I can't sleep anymore. I can't close my eyes anymore. The things I do are different. The way I think is different. I've lost a lot of energy. I was already losing a lot of energy because of the gradual corrosion of life and age. But, you look at my casts today and then compare them to when I started doing public casting for StarCraft 2 or whatever, or even like the LPs predating 2014 when all this shit really got underway. I'm an entirely different person. And that's why I talk about ambitions and aspirations, because that is what defines you when you are going through this stuff. Is when you go through this shit that just keeps kicking you in the balls over and over and over, the only thing that is ever going to survive is the shit you actually really genuinely care about, right? And for many people, that's like their friends, their family, or whatever. And for me, it's like that the only thing that survives to this point is D&D and my Unreal project. And that's it. That's the only things I got. And I'm not willing to go through worse hell for those at this point. There's a limit to that point where it's like, I haven't been able to focus and work on those for many years now, and things are going to get worse, and it's going to be even harder to focus and work on those. And it's like I go through hell each and every single day between the mental trauma and everything else, and there is actually a limit for that. I didn't think there would be, but there is. And it takes a lot to find that limit. It takes a lot to break a person, and I'm at that point. And, is a person's aspirations are only as great as they are. And a person is only as great as their aspirations. A person with no aspirations is no longer a person. And aspirations are only going to make as much as the person can put into them. And people do have limits to what they can handle. And I think for the average person, those limits are actually really quite low. Because, most people are living middle class. Like most of the people that I'm familiar with are living like middle class or high class, and they can buy foods. They can go out and eat in the night. They can go out and eat almost every day. They can spend on gacha games, for example. They can just fucking do whatever. For them to endure a week of living on existence minimum, to having to do their own yard work, to having to deal with rats and wasps and shit that's actually legitimately dangerous to deal with, to have ants crawling around in their house for all year. I think that would just snap them right in half and they would never bounce back. And you see that very often in the case where, a lot of people apparently like Zoomers freak out if their phone runs out of battery or something. Like it just completely breaks them. And, most people are not accustomed to hardship. And, as you find that they don't, like a lot of people don't appreciate the value of money and the value of time. And a lot of people try to justify, I'll just throw money at somebody who made a mod because it took time, but it's, that time wasn't well spent, for one. For two, it's, it's not really a good use of your money to begin with. And I never understood PayPigs, to be honest. It's I don't understand Super Chat. I don't understand people willing to throw money at whatever like that. It's just, I don't know the whole culture thing. It's been explained to me, but it's still, I can't figure out how people are willing to throw away so much of their money for literally just having a text to speech on a screen like Microsoft Bob has existed for years. So, you get into the whole parasocial relationship, you get into the simping thing, and that's a huge rabbit hole I don't really want to go into right now, but that is the in thing now. That's the in thing that makes the money, right? Like, if you wanted to really fund your project and quit your job, you would look to becoming a VTuber. You would look to either do IRL streaming, or you would, become trans and or use a voice changer. That AI thing.
Yeah, the VTuber shit is crazy because there's so many people who are guys who run female VTuber streams or whatever, and I cannot understand it at all. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just not in touch with my feminine side enough, bro. But like,
well, it has been told to me that I explained this before in an earlier big voice table. But one of the people in the business told me, this is a person with over 600,000 subs, by the way, told me that, a lot of people is a similar relationship to the cabaret girls within Japan, where you can go to a place and you pay money and you talk to a girl, and it's, nothing sexual or anything like that. You tell them, how your day was. It's just to have a conversation. And because a lot of these people, they don't have the time, or they're not well off enough or whatever to actually have an actual relationship. But they still want to have that connection, that parasocial relationship. And that is what draws people to these VTubers and stuff like that. Like HKS watches a lot of these people. Not VTubers, but like Joel, like Vine Sauce and stuff like that. And they are super mega ultra popular. And the content that they put out can be genuinely entertaining, like the Dollhouse thing, and like the corruption streams and stuff like that. But when I watch them, I feel like literally any single person could make the same content if they had like the money to make the Dollhouse, or they had the access to the corruptions or stuff like that. To me, as casters, they do not stand out at all from any person I talk to. They're just the same average Joe. And that may be even the entire point. But it's also like a first bird gets a worm kind of thing too. But it's also like, I understand the whole approach to the parasocial thing to the stage that even some people like Seth, for example, had to distance themselves from it because they had people emailing them CP or something like that. And faxing their family members CP or just fucking the lunacy I have already tasted a little bit of because of people like Chris and Felshin. But
hey, that Mark 009
and Mark, just like that was weird as fuck to me where these people came. And Schwa had that experience too with the sock loving Greek, right? And that was like 40 something years old and posted weird provocative foot fetish shit on her social media for like 3 years before I blew him out. And
it's just some people, I mean, especially when it's like male to female relations, like some people just aren't socialized and just don't know how to do. Like, I'm not going to claim I'm some savant in that department either, but I know that I'm not supposed to start fucking like creepily posting shit on people's social media. Yeah, like there's better ways to put the work on somebody if you're trying to get in,
Yeah, but that's the business, right? Like, that's the end thing, and that's what makes the big money, to the point that these organizations prohibit you from having relationships. Or if it is ever found out that you are having a relationship, it actually legitimately kills your career. Yeah, it can. Because your career is based on these literal retards thinking they actually have a chance with you. Yeah. That is what so much of it comes off of. And, like, there was this is gonna possibly, I don't know what our time is, but this
we're past it already, so we'll wrap up. But feel free to.
There was a game that this person streamed to me that I was talking about that's in this business. The game, I believe, was called Needy Girl Overdose or something like that. And I believe it is Japanese, and it is like It is a game like of something I've never ever experienced before, but it's like you can almost think of it as like a Sim City or The Sims, focused on an individual who is like a streamer girl, and you kind of like try to manage their streaming schedule and their mental health and stuff like that.
Okay.
And apparently, this game is just absolutely loaded with really like accurate references to real world events for streamers and drama and other like more obscure references to like anime and stuff like that, and sort of like the culture surrounding it. And apparently this game, which is extraordinarily simple on the surface, it almost looks like Western pixel art.
Okay.
This game actually has a lot of really accurate reflections on what it is like for these people to be doing this, where to the point that it can be too accurate, and where there comes in a lot of like substance abuse and like mental fatigue and stuff like that, trying to put on a show and trying to make these things and the stream stuff and things that happen, which is where a lot of like the references to real life stuff comes from, because there are things that happen with that. And it's like people will literally destroy themselves to do this because they can't handle it, because it's usually like young girls or whatever, young women. Well, in a lot of cases with VTubers especially, you'll find that it's like the ugly white women or whatever that end up in this because they can't succeed elsewhere in life. But there are I've seen doxes for a lot of them. There are even a lot of attractive women doing this too, because it's just better than seeking an actual relationship.
Sure.
And if you can hide your real life from it, like this person I talked to, she lives like multiple lives. There's the work life, there's the virtual life, there's the life with the other groups of people that she talks to that you have to put on a face for, that can never interact with people like me, for example, and never know about. Obviously, their virtual existence has to remain completely isolated from all of them. And then the work life is also completely different. And mentally fatiguing. Very, very mentally fatiguing. But that's where the money comes. That is where the money comes from. And this person, very well off, very rich. But at the same time, like, to live like that is absolutely incredibly demanding. And you can really see it just wearing on them a lot. And, like, there's so many facets I could talk about that in spite of my very limited knowledge. And I do not know, like, why. Like, this is one of the people that we're talking about aspiration, right? This person is a capable singer, capable musician with many instruments. Their line of work is in something completely unrelated to all of that. Obviously, they had an interest in the former if they're involved in that and have been doing it for most of their lives, but they didn't commit to that. They went into another line of work. And I feel in many cases that they're actually really aimless. And I think that they admit to being aimless to some extent with their dialogue. And like they are more conscious of time and stuff like that. Like you're talking about, like, you hit the age of 30 and you start like hitting that midlife crisis. They really feel that. They really feel that. And yeah, this is a person whose wealth is beyond imagination for either of us. And it's just like they have all these other skills and shit going on and all this support, and they feel that because that's the stress of that. And it's not really like a one-sided thing in many cases like that. Like a lot of these streamers and VTubers and stuff like that can't handle that over a long period of time. And, there's a lot of work trauma related stuff too. And, it's like, then you look back at like mods. And mods in comparison to that seem almost like comedically juvenile.
Yeah.
But it's not really. Like when you get to this kind of work with CMBW or whatever, like the amount of time and energy and mental drive that still goes into that is absolutely massive. But then you can't really think, like, do you think of the scale of the traffic that surrounds a mod as being even remotely comparable to someone like, any of like the major HoloLivers or Vinny or whatever? No. Like sometimes they bring up one of these small projects and it drives a lot of traffic to them.
Yeah.
But that's, that brings us into the whole, streamer advertiser thing. But you will never see an actual like project like that drive that same kind of like interactivity. And therefore you never really quite think of it the same way. Like the whole framework for how content and content creation has completely changed. It's almost like the whole world is surrounding you. You sat down in your basement and you made a mod and you looked outside and suddenly you're on fucking Mars. Nothing even remotely resembles it. That's kind of like how I felt like.
Yeah. I know what you're saying.
Because I spent so much time just sitting in my projects, and I looked up and I've been making LPs, and suddenly like VTubers are a thing now, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, how the fuck? I still don't really understand what the real draw is. It's been explained to me. I still don't understand how it became that way.
Yeah.
Why it sustains itself.
Well, it's a question we definitely don't have time to get to the bottom of today, but it's definitely like a wacky topic, and for sure, like the lesson there being don't necessarily. Well, one of the lessons anyway is if you do just sit down and do work on your own, like you can wake up.
Focus
on Mars,
your work, right? Like that's what I tell people is, don't worry about the shit other people are doing.
Yeah.
Like I'm working on LPs. I'm never gonna be fucking popular. My shit's on a fucking private FTP anyway. I don't even have my site functional anymore. It's like that never bothered me. I produce it for myself. As long as you're content, then just keep marching on. That's what aspirations are all about.
I have to agree with that. So I think that we'll close this out here for this big boys table. We are one number closer to 69. And I think we'll be able to make it after all. So thanks for joining me again, and thanks for doing the cast over. This is plural now, because I think by the time this one comes out, assuming you actually are able to get to the...
Yeah, I'm going to need you to send me whatever I need for that, and I'm going to stick my penis into an outlet, and then I think I'll get started right away.
Awesome. All right. We'll close this out here then. Thanks again, and see you guys in the next episode.
Smoke weed every day.